Chapter 2755. Plus, she could enter and leave the valley as she pleased, entering the guest room and interrupting the conversation between the Grand Elder and the guest without being stopped by the other disciples. Could it be that this position was a very powerful one? Mrs. Tang's strength came entirely from the pills she consumed. She had eaten quite a lot of the Snowy Valley's soul-gathering pills, and small chi-gathering pills. Her goal wasn't to gain strength, but to live a few more years with Tang Yun and rob the Snowy Valley for a few more years. Then should we trade now? Lin Yi asked. Let's trade now. The Grand Elder nodded. Oh, then you guys trade. I'm leaving. Mrs. Tang saw that Lin Yi had come and naturally rushed to find Tang Yun. She knew that after the Grand Elder and Lin Yi exchanged things, he would tell Lin Yi to leave as soon as possible. So Mrs. Tang had to hurry. With that, Mrs. Tang left on her own, not even bothering to look at the Grand Elder. Lin Yi was even more shocked. Wasn't she looking down on the Grand Elder too much? After Mrs. Tang left, the Grand Elder let out a sigh of relief and said to Lin Yi, "Let's go, Mr. Lin. Come with me to the treasury and get the things we want to trade." Grand Elder Zhao guessed that Mrs. Tang was probably going to find Tang Yun, so how could she let Lin Yi stay in the guest room? She wanted to follow Lin Yi to the treasury and complete the trade. Then, she would personally send Lin Yi out of the valley to avoid any contact with Tang Yun. Originally, only elders and above could enter the Snow Valley's treasury, let alone outsiders. But the Grand Elder had to bring him along in order to keep an eye on Lin Yi. All right, Grand Elder, that Snowy Valley Patroller, what's his position? Lin Yi asked, a little confused. He seems pretty strong. Ahem. The Grand Elder coughed twice, not knowing how to explain. She's someone we can't afford to offend. Forget it, let's not talk about her. Her position is very special. Let's hurry to the treasury. Oh, okay. Lin Yi saw that the highest elder was unwilling to say more, so he did not ask further. After all, this was the internal affairs of the Snow Valley, and it was not appropriate for an outsider like him to say much. After Mrs. Tang left the guest room, she ran straight to Tang Yun's training room. The disciple on duty didn't dare stop her and let her in. Tang Yun had just finished her practice when she heard footsteps. She opened her eyes and saw Mrs. Tang. "Mom, why are you here? Let's go. Yun, Mom's taking you to see someone," Mrs. Tang said as she pulled Tang Yun's hand towards the door. "Ah, who are you looking at?" Tang Yun was confused. What was wrong with her mother today? He had rushed here in such a hurry, and before they had even said a few words, he had already pulled her out. "You'll know when we get there. We won't be able to make it if we wait any longer." Mrs. Tang was planning to give Tang Yun a surprise. Okay. Tang Yun was pulled by her mother as they ran. "You, stop." Mrs. Tang walked for a while, originally heading for the guest room, but she suddenly stopped and pointed at a patrolling disciple. The disciple was shocked and quickly stopped. Who in the Snow Valley didn't know Mrs. Tang? Those who didn't know Tang Yun also knew Mrs. Tang. "Oh, it's Aunt Wang. What's the matter?" "I'm asking you, did you see the Grand Elder?" Mrs. Tang asked. The patrolling disciple did see the Grand Elder, but he didn't have the right to discuss the whereabouts of the Grand Elder. He hesitated and didn't answer. "You don't want to talk? You don't want to live in the Snow Valley anymore?" Mrs. Tang glared at him angrily. "I'm sure you've heard of the rumors about me in the Snow Valley. They said that they would rather offend the Valley Master, Sydney, than offend Aunt Wang. I think you want to offend me, right? Do you believe that I won't kick you out right now?" The patrolling disciple was sweating profusely. "Hurry up and tell me. If someone blames you, I'll make sure you're fine. Just push the blame onto me." Mrs. Tang humphed. "Yes, I saw the Grand Elder." She went to the treasury. The patrolling disciple sighed in relief after hearing Mrs. Tang's promise. "Oh, did she go alone? or with someone else? Mrs. Tang continued. With a young man. The disciple replied, honestly. All right, you can go now. Mrs. Tang waved her hand, signaling the disciple to leave. The patrolling disciple felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and quickly left. Old thing, I knew you were up to no good. Let's go, Tang Yun, let's go to the treasury. Mrs. Tang waved her hand and brought Tang Yun to the treasury. Mom, what are you talking about? What old thing? What's up to no good? Tang Yun didn't know what her mother was talking about. Oh, don't worry about it. Just follow me, Mrs. Tang said. Oh. Tang Yun nodded and followed her mother. Mr. Lin, this is the treasury of the Snowy Valley. After you enter, don't move around. I hope you understand. The Grand Elder spoke politely to Lin Yi because he didn't want any unnecessary conflict. He quickly gave him the things and told him to leave. It would be bad if he met Tang Yun in the Snowy Valley. All right, Lin Yi understood. This was an ancient sect's treasury. It was good enough that he was allowed to enter. He wouldn't be so ignorant as to touch it. The Grand Elder took out the water element heaven-class weapon from the treasury and 4 stalks of orchid jade grass. The things are here, Mr. Lin. Please take a look. If it's possible, leave your mist element heaven-class weapon behind, and I'll send you out of the valley. All right. Lin Yi felt like the Grand Elder was chasing him away. It was as if he couldn't wait to finish the deal and leave. However, the Grand Elder was polite and didn't break the deal. Lin Yi didn't care too much. The Grand Elder could do whatever he wanted. He might have other things to do later. After all, the Grand Elder of a sect had many things to do. He couldn't use all of them to receive cultivators who wanted to trade for treasures. Lin Yi quickly checked the items the Grand Elder brought over. There shouldn't be any mistakes. He nodded. No problem. It was a pleasure trading. Chapter 2756. All right. Thank you. Lin Yi nodded. The two of them exited the treasury and walked back the way they came, but after a few steps, the Grand Elder's expression changed. Not far from them, Mrs. Tang and Tang Yun were walking towards them. The Grand Elder's footsteps paused, puzzling Lin Yi. He raised his head to see that Snowy Valley Watcher, who'd helped him walk over to him, with a girl in white beside her. She didn't have any makeup on, but that pure beauty made Lin Yi's heart skip a beat. He felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart. When Lin Yi looked at Tang Yun also saw Lin Yi. Her beautiful face flashed with excitement, and a thin layer of mist appeared in her eyes. She immediately lowered her head, afraid that her strange behavior would arouse Lin Yi's curiosity. Tang Yun never thought that the person her mother brought her to see was Lin Yi. Why did he come to the Snow Valley? What was he doing here? But it didn't seem like he was looking for her, because, at this moment, Tang Yun could feel that Lin Yi didn't know her. What a strange girl. Lin Yi saw Tang Yun lower her head and wondered what was wrong with her. He wanted to take a closer look, but the Grand Elder grabbed Lin Yi's hand and said, Mr. Lin, let's go. Oh. Lin Yi was pulled far away by the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder was a master at the peak of the late stage of heaven class, so Lin Yi didn't have any intention of resisting. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to stop. However, the girl's image seemed to be carved into his heart, and he couldn't get it out of his head. He wanted to see the girl's face clearly, so he turned around and saw that the girl had also turned around and was looking at him. Their eyes met, but Lin Yi's heart palpitated. It was as if he had seen this beautiful girl in his previous life. Otherwise, Lin Yi would not have lost his composure after seeing so many beauties. In fact, Lin Yi still couldn't see the girl's face clearly, because just as Lin Yi was stunned, the girl lowered her head again. Could this be the so-called love at first sight? Lin Yi was confused. He had never felt this kind of love at first sight before. The girl was getting further and further away from Lin Yi's eyes, turning into a small black before he could no longer see her. The Grand Elder had pulled him away. Grand Elder, Who's the girl next to the inspector? Lin Yi turned around and asked curiously. He'd even forgotten to check out the girl's strength. The Grand Elder's expression changed slightly, and he said solemnly, Mr. Lin, don't you think that your words are a bit rash? Who she is an internal matter of our sect. I have no obligation to answer Gu's secrets. This has nothing to do with you. You are only here to exchange for something. Now that you have it, leave quickly. I'm sorry. Lin Yi shook his head, thinking that he had indeed been rash. Gu had no obligation to tell him who this person was, and even if he knew who she was, it had nothing to do with him. It was taboo for him to pry into someone else's sect in private. So Lin Yi let it go. Tang Yun raised her head, tears streaming down her face. She stared at Lin Yi's back and direction, clenching her fists, her body trembling uncontrollably. Yun, he's gone. Let's go back. Mrs. Tang sighed, not sure if it was the right decision to bring Tang Yun here. And Tang Yun nodded. Thank you, Mom. I just took one look at him. And knowing that he's doing well is enough. He came to Gu this time to exchange for something. With that, Mrs. Tang told Tang Yun about Lin Yi's purpose for coming here. When Tang Yun heard her mother say that under her interference, the Grand Elder agreed to give Lin 4 stalks of jade orchid grass, she couldn't help but laugh. Mom, I want to see him one more time. Tang Yun didn't want to leave. Lin Yi should have left Gu by now, but Gu was a naturally formed depression. As long as one stood on the highest peak of the valley, they would be able to see Lin Yi. Then go. Mrs. Tang supported Tang Yun. Mrs. Tang was very supportive of Tang Yun. If you want to go, then go. I'll be here. Don't worry. If that old geezer comes looking for you, I'll cover for you. And thank you, Mom. Tang Yun was very happy. She used to think that her mother was controlling everything and giving her random ideas, which annoyed her a little. But now she knew how good her mother was to her. No need to be so polite with Mom. Mrs. Tang smiled. Tang Yun jumped up and disappeared from Mrs. Tang's sight, floating to the highest edge of the valley. Tang Yun was now an early phase of sky class, and because she received the inheritance, her path of training was unimpeded. There were no barriers or obstacles, and she went all the way to sky class. Tang Yun didn't need to use any medicine to get to sky class, and this was naturally because of the benefits of the inheritance. Of course, because she came from an ancient sect, Tang Yun knew a lot more. Only by practicing heartless arts to the highest level could one reach sky class late phase peak. The Grand Elder also practiced heartless arts, but because she didn't reach the highest level, her strength was only at sky class late phase peak, not sky class late phase peak. But to advance to the heavenly Tao, according to legend, only sky class late phase peak had a higher chance. Normal sky class late phase peak had little hope, and this wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that if the inheritor wanted to do that big thing, he had to have the strength of sky class late phase peak to have the ability to protect himself. Or else there was a high chance of danger. Mr. Lin, I will send you here. You can leave now. The Grand Elder sent Lin Yi to the entrance of the valley, and then made a gesture of invitation to Lin Yi. Okay, Grand Elder, please go back. Thank you for sending me off. Lin Yi cupped his fists and said politely. The highest elder nodded, then turned around and returned to the Snow Valley. However, he whispered to the Snow Valley disciple who was patrolling at the door, keep an eye on him. Don't let him come in again. If he comes in again, inform me immediately. Yes, the patrolling disciple quickly responded. The Grand Elder was afraid that Lin Yi would return, so she specially reminded him. But what she didn't expect was that Tang Yun would take the initiative to leave the valley and look at Lin Yi again. Chapter 2757. Instead, he said to Jiao Yazi in the space of the jade pendant, Jiao Lao, is this the birthplace of the fog element? If I stay here, will I be able to inherit the power of the mist origin? Well, it should be possible. Jiao Yazi nodded after listening and said, in theory, you should go to the birthplace of the power to accept the inheritance. Then, can I accept the inheritance now? What should I do in order to accept the inheritance? Lin Yi thought that since he had come to the Snow Valley, it was best to accept the inheritance here. If he could accept the inheritance, it would be great. It would save him the trouble of coming again in the future. How do I know? Jiao Yazi shook his head and said, to accept the inheritance, you need to prepare a lot of things. My memory hasn't been unlocked, so I don't know. It should not be the time yet. If you are in a hurry, you can find a way to accept the inheritance yourself. You don't know? It's such a trap. Lin Yi was speechless. Jiao Yazi didn't know how to accept the inheritance. Didn't I come here for nothing? And the worst thing is, what should I do in the future? How long do I have to wait to become a blacksmith and condense the jade pendant? Is this jade pendant a trap? If I jump into it, I won't be able to come out? I remember that blacksmiths don't have to circulate the attributes in the body, right? Then why do I have to turn all of them into real attributes? Lin Yi asked unwillingly. You don't have to circulate, but all of them are virtual attributes. You can't become a blacksmith. Among the 3 attributes, at least 2 of them are real attributes. Only then can you become a blacksmith. Otherwise, do you think it's so easy to become a blacksmith? Any ordinary person can become one by taking 3 elixirs? Jiao Yazi said with disdain. Then, blacksmiths are everywhere. That's true. Lin Yi was stunned. He blamed himself for thinking too simply. Jiao Yazi was right. If all the blacksmiths were virtual, wouldn't there be blacksmiths everywhere? With some regret, Lin Yi shook his head and prepared to leave in his car. However, he suddenly had a feeling that he was being watched. Lin Yi turned his head and keenly discovered that there was a person standing above the valley in the distance. She looked just like the beautiful woman beside the inspector of the Snow Valley. Lin Yi was a bit surprised and felt that something was strange. He stretched out his hand and waved at the girl. Tang Yun didn't think that Lin Yi would suddenly turn around and look at her. She was shocked. She just wanted to stand there and look at Lin Yi quietly. She didn't want Lin Yi to notice her. However, she suddenly remembered that she was standing very far away. Lin Yi definitely couldn't see her clearly. So, Tang Yun smiled lightly at Lin Yi. Her smiling face was like a snow lotus in the wind. It was gentle and beautiful. It formed a sharp contrast with her cold appearance. Only when facing Lin Yi, Tang Yun was passionate. At other times, she was cold in the Snow Valley. Even in front of the Grand Elder, Tang Yun was still cold. That faint smile was like a sharp sword, piercing into Lin Yi's heart. Although he couldn't see the girl's face clearly, this smile made Lin Yi feel that it was especially beautiful. The coldness of the snow mountain seemed to melt in an instant. However, after the smile, the girl flashed away, leaving only the empty snow mountain and the beautiful imagination in Lin Yi's mind. Lin Yi shook his head and got into the car. He drove away from the Snow Valley. He thought of Wang Xinyan's illness and temporarily put the girl at the back of his mind. Love at first sight couldn't compare to the feelings between him and Wang Xinyan. He had to rush back as soon as possible. Lin Yi's car drove on the way back. Tang Yun returned to her training room. From now on, the 2 of them might not meet again. Tang Yun saw the current Lin Yi. Although she missed him, she was satisfied. The car drove quickly on the deserted road. However, suddenly, not far from Lin Yi's car, 2 people appeared. 2 people dressed in black. Screech. Lin Yi quickly stepped on the brakes and stopped the car. There was a trace of coldness on these 2 people's faces. What made Lin Yi frown the most was that these 2 people were early-stage heaven-class masters. Even if Lin Yi crashed into them with his car, he wouldn't be able to get away with it. Who knows? They might just use a martial arts technique to destroy his car. Bad intentions. This was Lin Yi's first thought because the two people clearly didn't hide their strength. Instead, they showed their full strength as early-stage heaven-class masters. They stood in the middle of the road in a domineering manner. It was obvious that they were here to stop Lin Yi's car. Good people don't come. But Lin Yi was a little puzzled. When did he offend such an enemy? Lin Yi had never seen these two before, be it in terms of appearance or attire. He didn't know where these two came from. And most importantly, why were they on his way home from the snowy valley? If they wanted to cause trouble, why didn't they go to Songshan City or Donghai City? Or could it be that these two people were originally blocking the road to rob, standing here, and randomly robbing cultivators who were returning from the snow valley? The last possibility was very high. After all, most of the cultivators who went to the snow valley were there to exchange for treasures. There were two heaven-ranked rogue cultivators who were blocking the road and robbing them. It was reasonable for them to steal some good stuff. Lin Yi took a deep breath and got out of the car. It was useless for Lin Yi to run away with his car. After all, they weren't slower than the car. So Lin Yi could only choose to run on foot or fight them. But now, it seemed that Lin Yi didn't want to leave the car and run on foot. After all, there was a heaven-class divine weapon in the car and 4 spiritual herbs for Wang Xinyan's treatment. If Lin Yi ran, what if these things were taken away? Moreover, in Lin Yi's subconscious, these two people were here to rob him. So, Lin Yi couldn't run away at all. However, if Lin Yi wanted to run away, he was confident that he could. They were only 2 heaven-class masters, and their strength wasn't that far apart. When Lin Yi was at the mystic class, his speed was almost the same as Rock Candy. Relying on his Qigong, he could barely catch up to Rock Candy. Now that Lin Yi was stronger, his Qigong was naturally better. It wasn't hard to escape from these 2 heaven-class masters. What are you two doing? Lin Yi looked at the 2 people in front of him coldly. Don't you know what we are doing? One of the 2 heaven-class masters with short hair snorted and sneered. Don't tell me you don't know us. Chapter 2758. Oh, you know about the ethereal attribute? Lin Yi was surprised. He thought that Jiao Yazi would say that he didn't know. He didn't expect Jiao Yazi to say that he did. I know. Jiao Yazi nodded. The ethereal attribute in your body must turn into substantial attribute. Only then can you reach the 2nd stage of the art of dragon mastery. What? There's such a situation? Why didn't you say so earlier? Lin Yi was surprised. He suddenly thought of his 2nd stage of the art of dragon mastery. Logically speaking, with his speed, he should have reached substantial attribute by now. However, he didn't. Lin Yi thought that it was because he didn't reach the right time. He didn't expect that it was because of the ethereal attribute in his body. You didn't ask me. How am I supposed to tell you? Jiao Yazi looked like he wouldn't tell you if you didn't ask. This made Lin Yi very angry. However, thinking about it, he didn't enter the space of the jade pendant for more than 10 years. Jiao Yazi didn't help him either. Lin Yi felt helpless. He already knew Jiao Yazi's personality. Lin Yi could only say, I thought I could reach the 2nd stage, substantial attribute. That's impossible. Once you reach substantial attribute, you can refine jade pendants. Your body is full of ethereal attribute. There's no way you can become a blacksmith. How are you going to refine jade pendants? Are you dreaming? Jiao Yazi said disdainfully. Lin Yi felt like cursing. If it weren't for the fact that Elder Jiao had helped him a lot, and that he respected the old and loved the young, he would have gone up and scolded Elder Jiao a long time ago. Look at me trying to find a way to change my ethereal attribute like a headless fly. Are you looking at a joke? However, Lin Yi still asked patiently, then how can I turn the ethereal attribute into substantial attribute? You'll have to figure it out yourself. Jiao Yazi shook his head. I don't have any relevant information in my memory. Gosh, if I can't turn the virtual attribute into a solid attribute, Doesn't that mean I'll never be able to step foot into the second level of the mental cultivation method? Lin, E was a little speechless. Isn't this a trap? Nope. How long has it been since you opened the second level stone door? You want to advance to the second level and open the third level stone door? Aren't you a little too impatient? Jiao Yazi said, You have to know, how long did it take you to open the first stone door to the second stone door? Moreover, there's still a 5-year deadline. The third level is gone, and you're still so anxious? That's true. Lin Yi thought about it carefully. He had just opened the stone door of the second floor not too long ago. He was indeed a little impatient. However, turning the ethereal attribute into substantial attribute was a troublesome matter. He still had to accept the origin inheritance one by one. Right now, the only place that Linny knew was the Ice Palace. Did he have to go there again to accept the inheritance? You don't have to worry too much about this. Sometimes problems can be solved without you even realizing it. Jiao Yazi explained. All right, I'll continue. Lin Yi nodded. No matter what, strength was the most important. Tonight, Lin Yi planned to use the 8th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm. His strength had already reached the late phase of Earth class. In theory, he could use the 8th form or even the 9th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm. When Lin Yi used the 7th form, he could instantly kill an early phase heaven class warrior. When he used the 8th and 9th form, if his chi could keep up, he should be able to instantly kill a peak early phase heaven class warrior or even a mid phase heaven class warrior. However, Lin Yi couldn't say how powerful it was without trying it out. He didn't know what form his body's limit was. But without a doubt, the higher the level, the harder it was to use. Once he used it, he would lose all his strength. Although it looked like an Earth-class martial art, it was actually a Heaven-class martial art. Feeling that his body was full, Lin Yi started to try using the 8th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm. It was equivalent to a normal Heaven-class martial art. The 14th form, according to the previous method, Lin Yi first prepared to use the fiery fist. Only when he was familiar with the 8th and 9th form of the fiery fist would he be able to use the more powerful fiery 8 trigrams palm. Obviously, the fiery fist was not difficult for Lin Yi to use. Lin Yi started from the first form of the fiery fist, moving like clouds and flowing water. The 7th form, the 8th form, then the 9th form, all in one go. Phew. Lin Yi was very satisfied with the fiery fist that he used. Next, Lin Yi used the 8th and 9th forms of the fiery fist alone. He could use them perfectly without any hindrance. It seemed that the fiery fist that had not been modified was relatively easy to use. After activating the 8th and 9th forms of the frenzy fist, Lin Yi tried to see if he could activate the 10th form. He started with the first form, all the way to the 8th form, the 9th form, the 10th form failed. It seemed that the 9th form was the limit of the late phase Earth class. The 10th form could only be used when he was at the peak of the late phase Earth class. Lin Yi was not surprised. After all, he was just trying it out. He did not think that he would succeed. After using the fiery fist, Lin Yi started to use the fiery 8 trigrams palm. He used the mantra of the fiery fist and the method of the 5 elements 8 trigrams palm to form the 8th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm. Lin Yi would not easily try to use the fiery 8 trigrams palm from the first form to the 8th form unless he had no other choice. From the first form to the 7th form, Lin Yi felt that his stamina was very tight. This was not a normal amount of stamina, so Lin Yi could only use the 8th form alone. What made Lin Yi happy was that the 8th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm was successfully used. Its power was much stronger than the previous 7th form. Lin Yi even felt that using the 8th form to ambush a mid-phase heaven class wouldn't be a problem. However, after using the 8th form of the fiery 8 trigrams palm, Lin Yi felt as if his stamina had been sucked dry. He almost couldn't stand straight and fell to the ground. Although this move is powerful, it seems that I can't use it so easily. Lin Yi smiled bitterly as he sat cross-legged on the ground. He quickly entered the jade space and began to recover his stamina. After using this move, Lin Yi no longer had the strength to use any more moves. Chapter 2759. But how cunning was the Grand Elder? She walked into the room quietly and looked at Lin Yi. She said faintly, "You're the practitioner who came to the valley to trade for treasures, right?" "That's right." Lin Yi cupped his fists and said politely, "You're the Grand Elder, right?" The person in front of him was a sky-class late phase peak, and Lin Yi guessed that she was the Grand Elder the patrolling disciple was talking about. "That's right." The Grand Elder nodded and said to the patrolling disciple, "Go make some tea. I'll talk to this practitioner." "Yes, Grand Elder." The patrolling disciple hurriedly replied. "Ha ha, what's your name?" The Grand Elder asked Lin Yi. Lin Yi. Lin Yi didn't hide it. His identity wasn't a secret in the ancient world anymore. There was no need to hide it. "This is my first time here. Please forgive me, Grand Elder. But I'm here because my wife, Feng Xiaoxiao, introduced me here. She's the vice sect master of the Ice Palace." Lin Yi brought up Xiaoxiao's identity, naturally because he didn't want to lose out in the trade. After all, his identity wasn't on the same level as the Snow Valley, and if he asked for the herb directly, a sky-class weapon would only be able to trade for one herb. Lin Yi brought up Xiaoxiao's identity to let the Grand Elder know that he had a background as well, and hoped that she wouldn't take it by force. Of course, Lin Yi didn't know that the Grand Elder knew him from the start and knew his background. Even without Xiaoxiao's background, the Grand Elder wouldn't lie to Lin Yi anymore. Tang Yun and Mrs. Tang were here, after all. "Oh, so you're a friend introduced by the Ice Palace." The Grand Elder smiled, feeling relieved. It seemed like Lin Yi wasn't here for Tang Yun, and as long as he wasn't here for Tang Yun, everything would be fine. "I wonder what Mr. Lin would like to exchange this time." "Well, I do have some things that I want to exchange, but I only know that you have one thing. As for the other things, I don't know. So please take a look at my things, then you can decide what you want to exchange." Lin Yi said. "Your things?" The Great Elder was slightly stunned. He thought that Lin Yi was here to ask for elixirs. He didn't expect that Lin Yi would take out an item for him to appraise. This made the Great Elder a little curious. What good item did he have? Of course, as Lin Yi spoke, he took out the heaven-grade weapon that belonged to the founder of the Snow Valley Snow Fairy and placed it on the tea table in front of him. "Grand Elder, please have a look." "Oh, The Great Elder didn't think much of it at first, but when her eyes landed on the weapon that Lin Yi took out, she couldn't move her eyes away. Her face was filled with shock and disbelief. Could it be? As the Great Elder spoke, she picked up the heaven-grade weapon from the tea table. When she saw the small snow character on the weapon, as well as the unique symbol of the Snow Valley, the Great Elder's hands trembled with excitement. Lin Yi had already expected this reaction from the Great Elder. After all, this heaven-grade weapon originally belonged to the Snow Valley. As the successor of the Snow Valley, it would be strange if the Great Elder wasn't excited to see the weapon of the founder of the Snow Valley. "What do you think, Great Elder? Is this something good?" Lin Yi smiled. "Yes, this is it. This is the heaven-grade weapon of the founder." The Great Elder's voice changed. She cultivated the emotionless tactics, so it was rare for anything to make her emotional. But at this moment, she couldn't control her emotions, because this matter was too shocking. This really was the heaven-grade weapon of the founder, the heaven-grade weapon that was most compatible with the mist attribute. All these years, the Snow Valley had been searching for this weapon, but there was no news of it. This was because after the founder of the Snow Valley said that she was pursuing the heavenly Tao, she never appeared again. No one knew where she went, and no one knew if she was dead or alive. Therefore, there was no news of the heaven-grade weapon. Now that it had appeared in front of the highest elder again, the highest elder was filled with emotions. He was both happy and worried. He was happy that the weapon had finally returned to Shuegu's hands. He was worried that the weapon had appeared alone. Did that mean that Ancestor Shue had failed in her pursuit of the heavenly Tao and had perished? Ha, great elder, how is it? What do you want in exchange for this heaven-grade weapon? Linny said with a smile, I was going to give it to my wife, Feng Xiaoxiao, but she has a cold body type, and an ice element weapon is the best for her. Mist element weapons can only be used, but they can't be used to their full potential. So I brought it over to see if I can get something better. If you guys have something better, and I think it's worth it, I'll give it to you. If not, then I'll just take it back for Xiaoxiao. The great elder was speechless after hearing Lin Yi's words. His second wife was his wife, but his first wife wasn't his wife. If you give it to your second wife, you might as well give it to your first wife. Even if I were to exchange this weapon back, it would be for Tang Yun to use. Only in her hands could it display its full potential. However, the Grand Elder couldn't tell the truth. He could only bear with it and said, Our Snow Valley has a heaven-tier divine weapon of water element. It's also a top-notch item. It's not any worse than this. Why don't I use that to call out to you? Feng Xiaoxiao trains in the ice element, so mist and water element weapons have the same effect to her. There's not much of a difference, but this mist weapon is very important to our Snow Valley. Supreme Elder, aren't you being too insincere by saying that? Let's not mention the fact that I came all the way here to trade with you. Even if Snow Valley was right in front of my house, you'd be the one taking advantage of me. Wouldn't you? Lin Yi shrugged. It doesn't make a difference whether I want the mist or water element. Why would I trade? Plus, if your water weapon isn't as good as the mist one, then I'll be at a disadvantage. You'll be the one taking advantage no matter what. There's no such thing in the world. Chapter 2760. He looked strangely at the two men in black in front of him. From their tone, why did it seem like they were here to seek revenge and not to rob him? Kid, you're pretty good at acting. You killed 3 of our blood-clothed underworld sex masters, but you're acting like nothing happened. You've got quite a strong mentality. I have to say, you're pretty good at acting. The short-haired man mocked, but there's no use in pretending. I have your photo and recognize your car. You're Linny, right? Lin Yi was even more startled. This person actually knew that his name was Linny. Lin Yi thought that they were just trying to scare him, building a foundation for the rest of the robberies. He didn't think that this person would call out his name right away. Blood-clothed underworld sect? Lin Yi frowned. He had never seen this sect before. Even if he had vaguely heard of them, he had no enmity with them. He didn't know when he provoked such a force. Kid, you're still pretending? The short-haired man looked at Lin Yi's confused face and became a little impatient. There's no use in pretending. I'll kill you today to avenge the lost elites of our sect. The blood-clothed underworld sect had 3 mystic late-phase peak masters who died on the way to assassinate Lin Yi. Of course, they weren't killed by Lin Yi, but by Little Qing. However, Tang Yun was with them, so Lin Yi chose to forget this part of his memory. Lin Yi didn't know that the 3 mystic late-phase peak masters thought that their fellow sect members died in Lin Yi's hands, so they came to find Lin Yi for revenge. Of course, revenge had to follow the rules. The blood-clothed underworld sect was an independent sect that wasn't weaker than the ancient sects, but they still had to abide by the rules. They couldn't kill people in the secular world. Lin Yi didn't leave the mortal world and went to an uninhabited area. The Bloodrobe Yellow Springs sect wouldn't be able to kill Lin Yi as they pleased. Otherwise, they'd be able to ignore the rules and restrictions of the ancient world. And the Bloodrobe Yellow Springs sect was afraid that the other ancient sects would gang up on them. After all, the blood-clothed underworld sect wasn't as strong as the Five Elements sect or the everyday sect. So even if Lin Yi went to the ancient tomb, they didn't make a move. That place was still within the city area. Only the snowy valley was truly uninhabited. Only then would the blood-clothed underworld sect dare to take revenge. Oh, Lin Yi saw that the short-haired man didn't want to explain, so Lin Yi didn't ask anymore. He used the mantra of the Frenzy Fist and used the seventh form of the Frenzy 8 trigrams palm on the short-haired man's chest. Frenzy 8 trigrams palm, seventh form. Bang. There was a loud sound, and the short-haired man was sent flying without any warning. He didn't even make a sound before he landed on the ground, dead. His chest was scorched black, and there was a palm-shaped hole in it. His organs were all burned away. It was a horrifying sight. An early-stage Heaven-class master was killed by Lin Yi without a sound. This stunned the other early-stage Heaven-class master beside the short-haired man. He looked at the scene in front of him and didn't understand. How could this kid be so powerful? Before taking revenge, the Bloodcloth Underworld sect had done a thorough investigation. This was a sect that prioritized profit above all else. If it was difficult to take revenge, they would rather not take revenge. They wouldn't do something so stupid as to harm their own people. Not to mention that Lin Yi could easily kill a Sky-class master. However, according to the investigation, Lin Yi was only an Earth-class master. Although his strength was much higher than when Zhao Qibing hired the assassins, he was still an Earth-class master. 2 early-stage Heaven-class masters surrounded him. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake? Who would have thought that Lin Yi could kill an early-stage Heaven-class master in one move? The other one broke out in a cold sweat and subconsciously reached for his chest. However, in the next moment, Lin Yi's Raging Fire 8 trigram palms 8 style came over. Although the 8th style consumed more energy than the 7th style, Lin Yi couldn't bear to use the 7th style twice in a row. This kind of martial technique that was used to attack the enemy was a world of difference from practicing in the air. Although Lin Yi used up energy in the air, it was definitely not as serious as this. The reason why Lin Yi used the 8th style was because of the continuity. Although it consumed more energy, it could be successfully used. If he took a break for a while, Lin Yi knew that he couldn't use the Raging Fire 8 trigram palm again. Even the 7th form wouldn't work. He couldn't use it twice in a row without any gaps. It would be better to use it in one go. Although it would be a bit exhausting, it wouldn't be dangerous. After the other Heaven rank expert died, he could rest as much as he wanted. Therefore, Lin Yi used the 8th style of the Raging Fire 8 trigram palm in one go and directly imprinted it on the chest of the early-stage Heaven-class master. The master's eyes were full of horror and fear. He even forgot to dodge. Before he died, he only shouted, "Lin Yi, kill me!" Then his voice stopped abruptly. His whole body was sent flying by Lin Yi. His miserable appearance was even worse than the previous short-haired cultivator. There was a huge hole in his entire chest. It had been pierced through, and his clothes were also ignited. After landing on the ground, there was still thick smoke. In fact, this early-stage Heaven-class master could have attacked Lin Yi if he wanted to escape, or when Lin Yi killed the short-haired master. However, the first impression made him think that Lin Yi was very powerful and that he couldn't defeat him. He weakened before the battle and weakened his momentum, which led to the tragedy of him being killed by Lin Yi. After killing 2 early-stage Heaven-class masters, Lin Yi was not very happy. Instead, he collapsed on the ground. His clothes were already soaked. The 7th and 8th style of the Raging Fire 8 trigram palm had drained all the energy in Lin Yi's body. There was even a deficit which made Lin Yi almost drop a level. Therefore, after confirming that the 2 Heaven-class masters were dead, Lin Yi suddenly fainted and forcibly entered the space of the jade pendant to recover his energy. In any case, the trouble in front of him was temporarily over. However, Lin Yi was puzzled. What kind of hatred did these two people who claimed to be from the bloodcloth underworld sect have with him? At first, Lin Yi guessed that this was done by the Supreme Elder. After all, he was the only one who knew that he had exchanged things from the Snow Valley. Only the Supreme Elder knew that there were robbers who knew his name. Chapter 2761. Lin Yi had no way to stop and replenish his true qi. He was sure that if he stopped, the opponent would catch up. Why are you chasing me? Lin Yi's mind was desperately trying to think of a solution. Could it be that his last trap was going to be wasted? Lin Yi wasn't willing to give up. If it was an enemy with a deep grudge, then it would be fine. But this person in front of him was completely baffling. Lin Yi was sure that this man in black was in cahoots with the two early-stage heaven-class masters who blocked his way. Otherwise, there would be no reason for him to chase after him. But even if they were in cahoots, Lin Yi didn't offend the bloodcloth underworld sect at all. If I don't take revenge for killing my fellow sect members, how will my bloodcloth underworld sect have the face to stand in the world of cultivators and assassins? The man in black's cold voice came over. It was calm and didn't have the slightest fluctuation. It was as if he didn't use any energy after running for so long. Lin Yi, don't waste your energy. I'll catch up to you sooner or later. You're just a late-stage Earth class master. There's no way you can run away. I'm just curious. How did you kill my fellow sect members? Do you have helpers? This was what the man in black couldn't figure out. When Lin Yi was running, he had already revealed his strength as a late-stage Earth class master. At such a critical moment, he didn't believe that Lin Yi would still be hiding his strength. This way, the death of his fellow sect members was a little strange. In his opinion, there should be helpers around Lin Yi. But if Lin Yi had helpers, then why was Lin Yi sitting on the ground and resting? Where were the others? And after chasing for so long, he didn't see Lin Yi calling for help. This made the man in black even more puzzled. First, tell me why you want to kill me. Then I'll tell you how they died. Lin Yi said, You don't know why I want to kill you? The man in black was stunned. He didn't think that Lin Yi would deny it. After all, killing one was killing two was also killing. There was no need for him to hide the fact that he killed the 3 profound stage assassins from the Yellow Spring sect. Could it be that the 3 assassins weren't killed by Lin Yi, but someone else? I've never even heard of you before. It's true that I killed those 2 before, but I really don't know when I became enemies with you. Lin Yi smiled bitterly as he ran. Really? The man in black didn't say anything. He was even more suspicious about whether the 3 people had died at Lin Yi's hands. He planned to go back and investigate in detail. However, he didn't plan to let Lin Yi go either. Since you killed my 2 teammates from the same sect, don't blame me. Then give me your life. Lin Yi was a little speechless. What kind of logic was this? If the 2 people hadn't taken the initiative to intercept him, Lin Yi wouldn't have killed them. But now that the grudge was obviously formed, and the other party didn't mention the previous matter, Lin Yi could only bite the bullet and continue running. Lin Yi, don't think that you can escape just because you have Qinggong. It's useless. The man in black said lightly, as if he had a card up his sleeve to catch up with Lin Yi. Of course, Lin Yi naturally knew that what the man in black said was the truth. With Lin Yi's current running method, he could only last for a day at most before his true qi was completely exhausted. At that time, he would be at the mercy of the man in black. No, I can't go on like this. If this goes on, the only result is death. Gritting his teeth, Lin Yi could only take a gamble. He suddenly changed the direction of his running. Of course, he didn't change it all at once, but made a slight change. Otherwise, the man in black behind him could directly change the angle and shorten the distance between the 2 of them. This was a risk that Lin Yi didn't dare to take. Lin Yi could only gradually adjust the direction of his running so that the man in black could only follow his footsteps. Obviously, Lin Yi did it very successfully. Although the strength of the man in black was tyrannical when it came to walking in the jungle wasteland, he was definitely not Lin Yi's opponent. Lin Yi, who had rich experience in attracting enemies in the primeval forest, successfully made the man in black accompany him in a circle, changing the direction of his escape. This time, Lin Yi's goal was the Snow Valley. Yes, the closest place to here was the Snow Valley. Lin Yi had no choice but to choose this method that was not a solution. In Lin Yi's view, the man in black behind him came from the bloodcloth underworld sect. But even if he was also from an ancient sect, he couldn't go against another ancient sect, right? Once he entered the Snow Valley, he would be temporarily safe. He was not afraid that the man in black would wait for him at the entrance of the Snow Valley. At that time, he could completely compress a true chi bomb in the Snow Valley. After coming out, he could directly blow up the man in black in the late stage of the Heaven Realm. Even if it didn't kill him, it would be enough to cripple him. And what Lin Yi was afraid of was that the man in black would directly follow him into the Snow Valley, because it was not impossible. If this was really the case, Lin Yi hoped that the people of the Snow Valley could help him resolve this crisis. Although Lin Yi knew that if the Snow Valley helped, it might make him pay a higher price. Maybe the Supreme Elder would take back the heavenly treasures and heavenly weapons that he had exchanged, but Lin Yi had no other choice. Lin Yi only needed to keep his bottom line and get the orchid mustard jade grass. As for the other things, he could just return them. Who asked him to be so unlucky to meet 3 crazy people? Lin Yi ran in front, and the man in black chased after him. Lin Yi ran into the Snow Valley, which made the man in black frown. Although the blood-clothed underworld sect was also one of the sects on par with the ancient sects, they still had some scruples when going to other ancient sects to kill people. After all, they were in the wrong. Although they did not kill the people of the Snow Valley, the blood-clothed underworld sect would definitely pay a certain price for the blood spilled on the spot in the other sect. Of course, the man in black only frowned, but did not stop, because the purpose of this trip was to kill Lin Yi. Now that 2 of his teammates were dead, he had no other choice. If he returned without accomplishing anything, the ancestor of the blood-clothed underworld sect would definitely not let him go easily. Not only did he not complete the task, but he also lost 2 people. How could he be the leader? Moreover, he broke into the Snow Valley to kill people. At most, the blood-clothed underworld sect would compensate the Snow Valley afterwards. This matter would then be forgotten, and there would not be any negative impact. Chapter 2762. But on second thought, it was unlikely. There was no need for the Great Elder to do this. If he wanted a gun, he could have snatched it back in Snowy Valley. It would have been much easier to kill him. Moreover, Lin Yi could see that the Great Elder was wary of him, so he shouldn't have made a move. If that was the case, then this Bloodcloak Yellow Spring sect was probably real. But who did the master shout, "Lin Yi will kill me," to before he died? Did he have some kind of communication device on him? Did he report it to his headquarters? But these were all secondary. When he got back, he would ask Boss Spy about this Blood Yellow Spring sect. Boss Spy was once the leader of the 5 Elements sect, which was even higher than the ancient times. If this organization really existed, then Boss Spy should have some understanding of it. Lin Yi quickly recovered his stamina. He didn't know that in the distance, there was another black-clothed man running towards him at full speed. When the Blood Yellow Spring sect carried out a mission, they usually sent 3 people. This man in black was the leader of their group, but when they ambushed Lin Yi, he didn't come. In his mind, Lin Yi was an Earth rank expert, and 2 early Heaven rank experts were enough to kill him. But he didn't expect that the last message he received was, "Lin Yi, kill me." In other words, both of his team members were dead. He couldn't believe it, but he couldn't contact the 2 anymore. Their communication device signal was also cut off. The man in black was shocked and rushed to the scene of the incident. His footsteps were fast, His brows were tightly furrowed, and his eyes were full of coldness. He was one of the gold medal assassins of the Blood Yellow Spring sect, with the strength of a late heaven rank expert. Under normal circumstances, assassins with this kind of strength would rarely kill ordinary targets. Lin Yi was an Earth rank expert. In his opinion, there was no need to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. If 2 of his team members could do it, there was no need for him to do it too. Therefore, he waited in the nearest small town. Just now, he was enjoying himself on the belly of a prostitute when he suddenly heard the bad news. But even so, he couldn't believe that 2 of his team members had met with misfortune. It was a bit unrealistic and beyond his understanding. How could an Earth rank expert kill 2 early heaven rank experts? Unless he had an accomplice. Lin Yi quickly recovered his strength. But before he could fully recover, Lin Yi keenly sensed that someone was coming. Someone was flying towards him at an extremely fast speed. It was just that this person was currently far from Lin Yi, so Lin Yi couldn't know his level. Lin Yi didn't know whether he was an enemy or a friend, but most likely it wasn't a friend. Especially the words of the other early heaven rank experts said before he died. Lin Yi had a bad feeling, sure enough, when the distance of this person was getting closer and closer. Lin Yi's jade pendant sent out a strong warning signal. It seemed that this person was very dangerous. If it wasn't for the threat to Lin Yi's life, the jade pendant wouldn't have given such a strong warning. Lin Yi couldn't help but secretly complain in his heart. His physical strength had just recovered by a small portion. It was impossible for him to activate the 7th or 8th style of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm. He could only activate the 5th style of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm. Maybe the 6th style would be a bit difficult. Chi bomb was even more out of the question. First, there was no time to compress it. Second, there was not enough energy in his body. 500 meters away from Lin Yi, a black shadow quickly ran towards him. Lin Yi also clearly saw the strength of the person coming, late heaven rank. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Wasn't this asking for his life? Not to mention a late heaven rank. Even if there was another early heaven rank, he wouldn't be a match for him. With his current situation, he could barely fight against an expert of the same level. Of the 36 stratagems, escape was the best strategy. When the person approached him, Lin Yi suddenly stood up and ran. He didn't care about his car anymore. If he died, the treasures and heavenly weapons in the car would eventually fall into someone else's pocket. So Lin Yi didn't think much at all and directly ran away. The black-clothed man saw that Lin Yi suddenly stood up and ran away. He was also stunned, but he didn't hesitate. He didn't even look at the 2 corpses on the ground and Lin Yi's car. He directly chased after Lin Yi. His mission was to kill Lin Yi. As for what was in Lin Yi's car, he didn't know and didn't care. As for the corpses, this was the wilderness. No one would pass by. It wouldn't be too late to collect the corpses of his companions after killing Lin Yi. Lin Yi didn't dare to be negligent. A late heaven rank master. Although he had the advantage in speed after using the butterfly microstep Qinggong, he didn't dare to be careless. Who knew if the person also knew Qinggong? If he also knew Qinggong, even if it was Yu Xiaoke's weak Qinggong, he would be F***ked. A late heaven rank master was not on the same level as him in terms of physical strength. If Lin Yi couldn't get rid of the person behind him, he would be killed sooner or later. Lin Yi exploded at this moment. He couldn't not explode. He wished he could turn into the purple lightning beast and run forward desperately. After running for about 10 minutes, Lin Yi felt that he should have gotten rid of the person behind him. Lin Yi had also seen the Qinggong of little girl Bingtang. With his current speed, he was afraid that little girl Bingtang wouldn't be able to catch up. However, when Lin Yi turned around, he was shocked that black-clothed man was actually still behind him. Although the distance was still the same, it wasn't close but a little far. However, this was the result of Lin Yi's burst. Lin E couldn't always be in a state of burst, so the distance was a little further. This wasn't something to be happy about. The black-clothed man could easily make up for this gap. Of course, what made Lenny shocked was why this black-clothed man could run so fast. He used the butterfly microstep Qigong. In theory, it was impossible for the other party to catch up, but now Lin Yi didn't get rid of him. This was a bit strange. Lin Yi could be sure that the other party must have some secret method. Otherwise, if Lin Yi faced a late heaven-ranked master, he could barely escape if he couldn't beat him. But now this person seemed to have the same speed as him, and he couldn't get rid of him. Chapter 2763. So, when the man saw Lin Yi running towards the valley, he chased after him without hesitation. Lin Yi watched as the black-clothed man caught up to him and entered the territory of the Snow Valley with him. He couldn't help but sigh. This guy was indeed relentless. He even dared to chase into the Snow Valley. It seemed like he was from a very powerful ancient sect. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ignored the reaction of the Snow Valley. A patrolling disciple saw Lin Yi and the man in black running into the valley's boundary. He wanted to stop them and ask, but he was only a mystic mid-phase. He wasn't a match for Lin Yi and the man in black at all. Before he could even reach them, they were already out of sight. Even if he was a sky phase, he wouldn't be able to catch up to Lin Yi and the man in black, much less a mystic. The patrolling disciple hurriedly pressed the emergency communication device that he carried with him. Generally speaking, emergency communication devices were not easily used in the Snow Valley. Many of these ancient sects still maintained the tradition of sending messages on foot. Only in urgent matters would they use this modern communication device. I am patrolling Disciple 14. I saw 2 people barging into the valley one after the other, and they are heading towards the entrance. Identity unknown. Please stop them. The patrolling disciple hurriedly said. The patrolling disciples heard the call and quickly gathered towards the entrance. Unfortunately, Lin Yi and the man in black were too fast. The 2 of them, one in front and one behind, rushed into the valley's gate before all the disciples had gathered. It had been so many years, and the Snowy Valley had never met someone like this before. No one dared to barge into an ancient sect, and so Lin Yi's appearance caught the patrolling disciples off guard. They didn't know how to deal with this sudden intrusion. They wanted to stop them, but they didn't dare to. One was an Earth-class late phase. The other was a Sky-class late phase. These patrolling disciples were mostly mystic disciples. How could they be a match for Lin Yi and the man in black? Furthermore, the speed of these 2 people had already reached the pinnacle of perfection. Even if they wanted to stop them, they would not be able to. They could only watch as the 2 of them charged into the Snowy Valley. However, the person who had seen Lin Yi after receiving special instructions from the Great Elder recognized Lin Yi at once. He hurriedly took out his communicator and called the Great Elder. Great Elder, this is bad. The Lin you mentioned is back again. However, he ran too fast, and we couldn't stop him in time. He barged into the Snow Valley. Got it. In fact, the Great Elder already knew about the chaos at the entrance of the Snow Valley. As an expert at the Peak of Heaven stage late stage, and with the previous Valley patrolling disciples report, she had already reacted at the first moment. However, she didn't expect the person to be Lin Yi. She was about to personally meet the 2 intruders, but when she heard from the patrolling disciple that Lin Yi was here, she hesitated. She wanted to see what was going on first. Jumping up, the Grand Elder stood at the highest point of the valley, where Tang Yun was standing before. Looking down from here, the Grand Elder's eyes and ears at the peak of Sky class could see everything that was happening in the valley. When she saw the person chasing after Lin Yi, she froze. Assassins from the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect? When did Lin Yi offend them? And a Sky class late stage at that. Lin Yi was able to run this far to lure him here? However, the great elder didn't have any intention of stopping them. Instead, she ordered all the disciples of the Snow Valley, "Don't move, let them run. Make way for me." Although the highest elder's order made the disciples of the Snow Valley a little puzzled as to why these two people were allowed to break in, the highest elder's order was like an imperial edict in the Snow Valley. It was more influential than Shui Li's words. Therefore, the disciples who were about to intercept them all stopped. At this moment, the great elder made up her mind. She wouldn't make a move and let Lin Yi fend for himself. No matter what kind of grudge he had with the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect, she could use the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect to kill Lin Yi and make Tang Yun give up. So, the great elder watched as Lin Yi was chased by the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect's black-clothed assassins. She was at ease. In Tang Yun's room, Mrs. Tang was talking to her when she suddenly heard a commotion outside the room. Mrs. Tang frowned. These disciples of the Snow Valley really have no manners. Don't they know that this is your training place? And they even made such a big commotion. They really don't want to live anymore. It's fine, Mom. Maybe it's something. Tang Yin shook her head, not minding. Humph, they're lucky. I'm happy today. Otherwise, I would have gone out to teach them a lesson. Mrs. Tang snorted. Tang Yun's family came to the Snow Valley later, so they didn't have the Snow Valley's communication device. The Snow Valley usually didn't use it. Usually, the disciples would send messages personally. They didn't use the communication device at all, so Tang Yun didn't ask. Otherwise, Mrs. Tang would definitely get such a fun thing. She could control the disciples at any time. How fun would that be? And because of this, Mrs. Tang and Tang Yun didn't know that the commotion outside the door was caused by Lin. He was puzzled as he ran. Why was it that when he ran into the Snow Valley, there was a commotion from the Snow Valley disciples, as if they wanted to stop him? But now there was no movement. None of the Snow Valley disciples that should have appeared, and the Grand Elder was nowhere to be seen. This made Lin Yi confused, but at the same time, a bad feeling welled up in his heart. Could it be that this person was really sent by the Grand Elder to kill him? Otherwise, why was he and the black-clothed man running madly in the Snow Valley without anyone noticing? Could it be that the Grand Elder was asleep at this time? Logically speaking, even if the Snow Valley disciples didn't report, with the Grand Elder's strength at the peak of the late stage of Heaven class, he should be able to sense the situation here. But now there was no movement, so Lin Yi could only think so. Thinking of this, Lin Yi secretly regretted it. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have lured the black-clothed man to the Snow Valley. Wasn't this the same as sending a sheep into a tiger's mouth? In the next moment, Lin Yi thought of leaving. He wanted to lure the black-clothed man out of the Snow Valley and then use the trap. Chapter 2764. However, it wasn't easy to run out of the Snow Valley. Lin Yi ran in from the entrance of the Snow Valley. Now he could only continue running forward and couldn't turn back. If he turned around, he would run into the black-clothed man. So Lin Yi could only circle around the Snow Valley and then run out. Therefore, Lin Yi tried his best to run towards the edge of the Snow Valley, preparing to circle around and run out from the entrance of the Snow Valley. However, Lin Yi's sudden change in route made the Grand Elder's heart jump, and he almost exploded from fright. The direction Lin Yi was running towards was where Tang Yun was cultivating. If Lin Yi kept running, he might be able to lure Tang Yun out. At that time, it was a small matter for Lin Yi to see Tang Yun because Lin Yi didn't know Tang Yun, but if Tang Yun stood up for Lin Yi, how could she, an early-stage Heaven Stage expert, be a match for the black-clothed man in the late stage of Heaven Stage? If anything happened to Tang Yun, then it would be too late for the Grand Elder to regret it. Thinking of this, the Grand Elder didn't dare to watch the show anymore. He directly flew down from the highest peak of the Snow Valley and floated towards the black-clothed man. Without saying a word, before the black-clothed man could react, a snow-white jade Rui arrived in front of the black-clothed man. The jade Rui instantly enlarged and transformed into a huge misty white, enveloping the black-clothed man. In the next moment, the jade Rui returned to the Grand Elder's hands, and the black-clothed man turned into a snow sculpture. His entire body was filled with misty crystals, and with a loud bang, he fell to the ground, lifeless. This jade Rui was naturally the Grand Elder's Heaven Stage weapon. It was also a water-type Heaven Stage weapon, although it could be used with her misty mental cultivation method. It was still inferior to the misty Heaven Stage weapon that Lin Yi brought. However, the Grand Elder's strength was there for all to see. With a wave of his hand, he could kill without leaving a trace the black-robed man chased after Lin Yi with the mentality of a cat chasing a mouse. In his view, Lin Yi would eventually be exhausted and captured by him. Moreover, when he ran into the Snow Valley, the disciples of the Snow Valley initially tried to stop him. Later on, no one meddled in his business. This made the black-robed man think that the Snow Valley was giving face to the blood-robed Yellow Spring sect, allowing him to chase people here without being stopped. The black-robed man was proud of himself, but he did not expect that a jade Rui would cover him and he would die. However, his death could be considered a quick one. He was frozen to death in an instant without much pain. The Grand Elder's sudden appearance and sudden attack caused Lin Yi to be stunned. Looking at the black-robed man, who was already dead on the ground, Lin Yi realized that he was wrong. This person was not from the Snow Valley. Otherwise, no matter how generous the Snow Valley was, they could not casually kill a heaven-rank late-stage expert. In fact, this black-robed man's death was really unjust. Logically speaking, he was already a heaven-rank late-stage expert. There was only a small level difference between him and the Grand Elder. If the two of them were to have a fair fight, even if the black-robed man could not win, he might not be killed instantly. At least he could still escape. But now he thought that the Snow Valley had given him face. Lin Yi ran in front while he chased from behind. He did not take any precautions, and the Grand Elder directly used his divine weapon. The black-robed man did not even have the chance to take out his weapon before he died. It was really a death wish. But in fact, even if he took out his heaven-ranked divine weapon, it would be useless, because his divine weapon could not be used to attack. Although his heaven-rank late-stage strength was very high, he was not as strong as an ordinary heaven-rank late-stage expert. He relied on another ability. Otherwise, with his heaven-rank late-stage strength, he would not be able to team up with two masters who were so much weaker than him to kill Lin Yi. Since the Grand Elder had made a move, the other Snow Valley disciples naturally could not sit back and do nothing. They all rushed over. What's that sound? Why is it so noisy? Mrs. Tang was a little angry. She had finally been able to whisper to her daughter, but there was always a mess of noises coming from outside the room. This made Mrs. Tang very angry. The Snow Valley was originally quite quiet. What was going on today? Mom, maybe something happened. Don't worry about it. Tang Yun did not care. No, I have to go out and take a look. Mrs. Tang stood up and frowned as she walked out of Tang Yun's yard. She wanted to see who was making noise, and then she would extort some benefits for Lin. These disciples surrounded him. Lin Yi woke up as if he had just woken up from a dream. He looked at the Grand Elder in disbelief. He was very puzzled and confused about what had just happened. Why did the Grand Elder suddenly make a move without a sound? Why didn't he make a move before? Lin Yi was puzzled. Thank you for saving me, Grand Elder. But no matter what, the Grand Elder had saved Lin Yi's life. So Lin Yi thanked her gratefully, and the Grand Elder snorted. She did not want to save Lin Yi at all. She only made a move because she had no other choice. She said perfunctorily, "It's nothing. He is already dead. You can leave in peace." Thank you so much. Lin Yi said, however, can Grand Elder tell me what kind of sect this blood-clothed underworld sect is? Why are they chasing after me? What? Why are they chasing after you? If you ask me, who should I ask? The Grand Elder was stunned and looked at Lin Yi strangely. This blood-clothed underworld sect is an assassin organization. Of course, they are different from the assassin organizations in the secular world. They are also an organization that takes money to eliminate disasters. However, they only accept missions to assassinate cultivators. If the target is not a cultivator or an ordinary person, they will not kill them. This is the rule set by the Ancient Summit. Assassin organization. Lin Yi was stunned. So, someone hired assassins to kill me? Maybe you killed their people by mistake, and they came to you for revenge. The Grand Elder explained. Killed their people by mistake? Lin Yi, on the other hand, couldn't remember who he'd accidentally killed to offend a mysterious organization like this. He was familiar with the common world's assassin organizations, but this was on the practitioner level. From what the Grand Elder said, the assassin organizations on both levels weren't related at all. Lin Yi didn't have anything to do with this organization, so why would he offend them? And, all right, you should go back quickly. Since you have provoked them, you have to be careful. They failed to kill you this time, and they lost a heaven stage expert. They may give up, but they may also take revenge on you. You should go back and prepare. The Grand Elder said faintly. Chapter 2765. How many heaven stage experts could an ancient sect have? Now 3 heaven stage experts were dead. How many heaven stage experts could there be in an ancient sect? Most of them could be counted with a few fingers, but the number did not exceed 2 digits. The blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect had lost 3 of their disciples at once. How could they tolerate this? Unless they had no successors. If they still had experts, how could they not take revenge on him? Yes, but they might be afraid of you now that their people are dead. They can start from other aspects, such as taking revenge on your family. The Great Elder said, I can do it once, but I can't do it a second time. Although it usually takes a long time for them to take revenge, usually half a year to a year, and the place they take action is often in the wilderness, far away from human habitation. But accidents can happen when they are angry, so you'd better go back and prepare quickly. Lin Yi didn't expect to provoke such a scourge sect. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Don't they only kill cultivators? My family is not a cultivator. Why would they do it? They only take orders to assassinate cultivators, but it doesn't mean they don't kill ordinary people. Taking revenge on others and taking orders are 2 different things. The Great Elder said lightly, Our Ancient Summit agreement only forbids them from taking orders to assassinate non-cultivators, but it doesn't restrict other things, so you'd better go back. The Great Elder urged Lin Yi with every sentence. Seeing that Lin Yi didn't want to leave, she couldn't force him to leave. She could only scare him. Otherwise, if Lin Yi became suspicious, it would be troublesome. They really have no professional ethics. Lin Yi was a little helpless, but the other party was an assassin, and their purpose was to kill. There was no way to talk about rules with them, so Lin Yi was also very helpless. He could only hope that the blood-cloth underworld sect would be afraid and give up. The Great Elder turned around and saw that more and more disciples were surrounding them, so she ordered a few of them. You guys take this corpse away first, but take off his shoes. Don't break them. Yes. Several Snow Valley disciples quickly responded, although they didn't know why the Great Elder wanted to take off the corpse's shoes. They still did as she said. These shoes? Lin Yi looked at the feet of the black-clothed man strangely before looking at the Grand Elder doubtfully. When the Grand Elder heard Lin Yi's question, she did not want to explain. She only wanted to send Lin Yi out of the Snow Valley as soon as possible. Immediately, because this place was too close to Tang Yun's training area. She was really afraid that after Tang Yun came out, something unexpected would happen. However, if she wanted to send Lin Yi away directly, she had to fulfill her wish. Looking at Lin Yi's curious look, she was afraid that Lin Yi would continue to ask questions. Hence, she could only be patient and quickly explained, "This pair of shoes is actually his heaven-level magic weapon." "Ah, this pair of shoes is his heaven-level magic weapon?" Lin Yi was stunned and looked at the shoes that the disciple had taken off. "That's right. This pair of shoes is called the Gale-Chasing Lightning Boots, and the martial technique that this person cultivates is called the Gale-Chasing Lightning Formula. It's a profound lightness skill that complements each other. After cultivating it, one can move as if they're flying. Although it doesn't have any offensive capabilities, it's a great weapon for tracking and escaping," the great elder explained. She told the truth because she didn't think that Lin Yi could take the shoes for himself. After all, she had killed the black-clothed man, and he had died in the Snow Valley. She had helped Lin Yi kill his enemy, so it was impossible for Lin Yi to ask for the Gale Lightning Boots. "Oh, I see." Lin Yi looked enviously at the Gale Lightning Boots in the disciple's hands, but he had no intention of taking it for himself. He only said, "If that's the case, then I won't disturb the great elder any further. Thank you for today's matter." And the great elder was overjoyed. She sang in her heart, "Go, go. Our reunion is like a gust of wind." However, just as Lin Yi was about to leave, a loud voice called out, "Wait." Then the disciples that had surrounded Lin Yi and the great elder all made way. Lin Yi turned his head and was a little stunned. Who else could it be if it wasn't the Snow Valley inspector from before? "You little brat, what are you holding in your hands? Why don't you show it to me before leaving?" Mrs. Tang pointed at the disciple holding the Gale Lightning Boots and said angrily, "Didn't I say? You have to tell me immediately when something good is being delivered to the Snow Valley. I don't think you took my words seriously, did you?" This Aunt Wang, the disciple holding the Gale Lightning Boots, was originally a very glorious thing. To be able to do something for the great elder, the other disciples were very envious. But in the blink of an eye, they were no longer envious. Fortunately, their hands were slow, or else they would have been the ones being scolded by Mrs. Tang. Ahem, this Gale Lightning Boots belongs to the man in black, not from the Snow Valley. The great elder cursed in her heart. What was to come had come, but luckily it wasn't Tang Yun. She just wanted to send Mrs. Tang back and get Lin Yi out of the way, so she explained on behalf of the man in black. "Oh, no need to say anything. I heard it all." Mrs. Tang waved her hand. She had heard the great elder's words from afar, so she waved her hand and said, "This Gale Lightning Boots is a good item. Since it doesn't belong to the Snow Valley, I'll give it to you." With that, Mrs. Tang snatched the boots from the disciple's hands and handed it to Lin Yi. The disciple didn't dare say anything, only looking at the great elder with fear. The great elder was so angry that he almost flew into the sky. His face was dark. This can't be. This person was killed by the great elder, and I'm already very grateful that the great elder helped out. How can I take this boots?" Lin Yi waved his hand and said, "Senior, thank you for your kindness. Why don't you take this thing, Senior? In case of danger, you can still escape and save your life." Lin Yi saw that Mrs. Tang was a good and kind person, always thinking of him, but her strength was a bit weak, so he wanted her to keep the boots for herself. "Oh, I'm here. No one would dare to kill me. You should take it. Didn't you offend the blood-clothed underworld sect? When they come looking for you, you'll be able to escape." Mrs. Tang said nonchalantly, "That's right. This was taken from the blood-clothed underworld sect. If the blood-clothed underworld sect saw it, it would cause unnecessary trouble, so it's safer to leave it in the Snow Valley." The great elder quickly followed up, on Lin Yi's words. Chapter 2766. The Grand Elder almost fainted from anger. So, you can keep your life if you take it, Mrs. Tang said. Moreover, if our Snow Valley stays, it will only attract unnecessary trouble. When the time comes, everyone will know that it was the Grand Elder who killed them. Right, Grand Elder? Yes, that's right. The Grand Elder took a deep breath, telling Lin not to get angry. Not bad. Take it. We're actually planning to hide it or destroy it. We don't dare use it either. The Grand Elder's heart was bleeding when she said this. She wanted Lin Yi to take the item and leave as soon as possible. She was afraid that Mrs. Tang would waste more time, and had no choice but to agree. In fact, the gale-chasing lightning boots was an ancient treasure. Many ancient sects were envious of it and wanted to get their hands on it. However, the Bloodcloth Yellow Spring sect wasn't weak either. Only their disciples could use it when they were out on a mission. When they returned, it would be stored in the warehouse. Even if other ancient sects wanted to borrow it, they wouldn't have the chance. Thank you very much. Lin Yi took the Gale Lightning boots and thanked the Grand Elder. He also smiled at Mrs. Tang. Thank you too, Senior. All right, Mr. Lin, you should leave. This started because of you. We don't want to get involved. The Grand Elder said faintly. Her tone indicated that she wanted to send him off. I'll be on my way then. Linny nodded and turned to leave. Tang Yun was a Sky Class Master. She didn't pay attention to the noise outside, but now that her mother was out, she could hear the conversation not far away. When she heard Lin Yi's voice, her heart skipped a beat. Lin Yi was back. Lin Yi was back again. She stood at the door of the courtyard and wanted to rush out, but her rationality stopped her from doing so. Lin Yi had already grown suspicious of her when he saw her at the top of the mountain. If she appeared again now, it would definitely arouse Lin Yi's suspicions. At that time, wouldn't all his efforts be in vain? Therefore, she stood at the entrance of the courtyard and resisted the urge to go out. But when she heard that Lin Yi was caught by the blood-clothed underworld sect, her heart tightened. Did he provoke another powerful enemy? However, he could only blame himself for being too weak and unable to help him. Tang Yin was overjoyed when her mother decided to give the boots to Lin Yi. Her mother was amazing, giving Lin Yi such a useful, life-saving item. Lin Yi returned to the place where he parked his car. The two bodies were still there. Lin Yi found a place to bury the bodies and drove away. Nothing was missing from the car. Lin Yi didn't expect that his trip back to Snow Valley would be a blessing in disguise. He got a pair of boots. This was a benefit that Lin Yi didn't expect before. That night, the black-clothed man, who was supposed to report the progress of the assassination to the blood-clothed underworld sect, didn't send back the news on time. This made Ancestor Yellow Spring frown. Did you manage to contact them? Ancestor Yellow Spring looked at his subordinate and asked, reporting to Ancestor. None of them can be contacted. The subordinate said carefully. What? None of them can be contacted? How is that possible? Ancestor Yellow Spring couldn't believe it. The 3 people on this mission were all Sky Class Masters. Even if the mission failed, it was impossible for none of them to come back. But they still couldn't contact them. Could it be? A bad feeling welled up in Ancestor Yellow Spring's mind, making him a little worried. I've already sent someone to contact them. Although this subordinate was an expert at the peak of the late phase of Sky Class, he was still trembling in front of Ancestor Yellow Spring. He didn't dare to be disrespectful because Ancestor Yellow Spring was an expert at the peak of the late phase of Sky Class. He was the most powerful existence in the world. An expert at the peak of the late phase of Sky Class was rare in the ancient times. All right, you can leave first. Come and tell me if there's any news. Ancestor Yellow Spring waved his hand, a little dispirited. A bad premonition had already risen in his heart. He could roughly guess the fate of his 3 subordinates, but he didn't dare to believe it. However, The next result made him very angry. The subordinate from before came again. This subordinate was also a first-class expert in the blood-clothed underworld sect. He was called Gloomy Forest Ancestor, but he didn't dare to be arrogant in front of Ancestor Yellow Spring. The blood-clothed underworld sect was a strict assassin organization, except for Ancestor Yellow Spring's senior brother, Bloodcloak Ancestor, who was currently in seclusion. There was no one in the blood-clothed underworld sect who could be on equal footing with Ancestor Yellow Spring. Gloomy Forest Ancestor was just a steward. Ancestor Yellow Spring. The bodies of Golden Medal number 5 and Golden Medal number 6 have been found. Gloomy Forest Ancestor's voice was a little hoarse, but there was also disbelief and shock in it. They're really dead. Ancestor Yellow Spring's voice was extremely bitter. Golden Medal assassins. Those were Golden Medal assassins. There weren't many people in the blood-clothed underworld sect. 2 of them died at once, and the other's fate was unknown. What about Golden Medal number 3? I'm not sure yet, but it seems that he's in trouble. There are traces of a chase at the scene, but because it's too messy, I can't tell where they ran to in the end. But one thing is, Lin E is fine now. Gloomy Forest Ancestor said with a bitter smile. Our people saw Lin Yi's car near the highway, and it's on its way back. Ancestor Yellow Spring slammed the table, and the exquisite mahogany table in front of him suddenly broke into pieces and turned into a pile of sawdust. Although Ancestor Yellow Spring was prepared, he still couldn't take the blow at this time. Don't tell me that these 3 people were killed by Lin E. Isn't he just an Earth rank expert? How could he kill 3 Heaven rank experts? How is this possible? According to the investigation of the intelligence team, Lin E has the strength to kill Heaven rank experts in seconds. Gloomy Forest Ancestor said weakly. Killing Heaven rank experts in seconds? What kind of ancient joke is this? Have you ever seen an Earth rank expert killing a Heaven rank expert in seconds? And 3 of them at once? Ancestor Yellow Spring glared and said angrily, Ancestor Yellow Spring, this matter, I'm afraid it's true. Gloomy Forest Ancestor said with a bitter smile. After careful investigation by the intelligence team, Lin E did kill a Heaven rank expert from the Red Conch, and it was an instant kill. Chapter 2767. Xinyan came out of the washroom and raised her head to see Lin E looking at her. She lowered her head shyly. She was a shy girl, and even though she lived with Lin E, she couldn't let go of herself. How do you feel? Lin E asked. I feel a lot better. Xinyan felt hungry all of a sudden. In the past, she wouldn't eat if she wasn't so hungry that she chose to sleep instead. I want to eat. Lin E said. Haha, all right, I'll go prepare something. We'll have a feast tonight to celebrate. Yao Yao, Shu, and Jing Jing will be back soon. Lin E said, so you're saying that I'm fine now? Xinyan was very happy after hearing Lin Yi's words. The problem that had been bothering her for so long was finally solved. Then, can you continue training tonight? Lin E looked at Xinyan, very touched. She didn't blame him for what happened to her. And the first thing she did after recovering was to let him train again. But Lin E could only shake his head with a bitter smile. Not yet. You've only recovered temporarily. If you want me to continue training, I'll have to deal with the Jade first. Otherwise, it'll be the same as before. Oh. Xinyan was a little disappointed. She was fine now, but she still couldn't help Lin E much. Lin E went to cook, and Meng Yao got a call from Lingshan at school. She felt a headache coming on. Tang Yuqi had been treating Lingshan to dinner almost every night to understand the situation. At first, Lingshan was very polite, but later on, she started to panic. She couldn't just let this go on like this, could she? Plus, Lingshan's sharp senses told her that Tang Yuqi was starting to suspect something. Although the topics they talked about during dinner had nothing to do with House Tang, the subtle probing always made her wary. Fortunately, she was a police. Her anti-detection abilities were very strong. Tang Yuqi might be a detective, but he didn't get much of an advantage. This kind of battle of wits and courage in a banquet like this was really tiring for her. She just wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. Meng Yao was panicking as well, but there was nothing she could do without Mrs. Tang's reply. Other than that, however, she received a piece of good news. Lin Yi had returned safely. Lin Yi had sent a text telling them to come back after school for a feast. Yushu was overjoyed. "Is there shark meat? What do you want to eat?" Meng Yao couldn't help but give Yushu a kick. "Who's going to catch sharks for you in the cold? Aren't you afraid that Lin Yi will catch a cold? If you want to eat it, go catch it yourself." "Fine, don't the supermarkets sell frozen ones?" Yushu said, feeling wronged. "Didn't you say that frozen food doesn't taste good?" Meng Yao glared at her. "Eat whatever you have, don't be a busybody." "Oh, okay." Yao Yao is becoming more and more considerate toward Shield Bro. Yushu mumbled. "What did you say? Say it again." Meng Yao turned around and glared at Yushu as if her tail had been stepped on. "I didn't say anything. I said, I'm not eating anymore." Yushu blinked innocently. Lin Yi had already prepared a table full of dishes by the time they got back. Han Xiao Xiao still had a box of rice and some vegetables on it before going back to the villa to read and eat. It was rare for a bookworm to reach this level. "Ah! There really is shark meat. Shield Bro is so considerate toward Shu," Yushu said happily as she looked at the shark meat on the table. Meng Yao was thinking about Ling Shan's situation. Although Xinyan seemed to be fine now, she still wanted to discuss with Shu and Xinyan about a plan at night. "Shield Bro, can you tell us about the process of getting the medicine? Did that snowy valley give you any trouble?" Yushu asked, wanting to ask if Lin Yi had any contact with Tang Yun. Of course, she couldn't ask him directly, so she could only ask in a roundabout way. "They didn't give me any trouble, but the Grand Elder is in charge of things in the Snowy Valley. That's different from the Ice Palace. The Grand Elder is cold, but she didn't shut me out. It was a lot smoother than last time." Lin Yi said, "That's true. I heard that the Snowy Valley is a sect that specializes in trading." Meng Yao nodded. "Yeah, but there's a Snowy Valley watcher there. She's quite kind-hearted, and with her help, the rewards were beyond my expectations." Lin Yi said as he told them about what happened in the valley. At first, Meng Yao and Yushu didn't know what was going on. Why didn't they know that there was such a person in the valley? However, when Lin Yi said that the inspector of the Snowy Valley had helped him, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. This person must be Mrs. Tang. Only Mrs. Tang could do something like this. But when they heard that Lin Yi was being chased by the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect after he left the valley, Meng Yao and Yushu's hearts tightened. Lin Yi didn't know why the blood-clothed Yellow Spring sect became enemies with him, but Meng Yao and Yushu knew that Lin Yi had forgotten about it, but they hadn't. They just didn't know how to tell Lin Yi. "Those Gale Lightning boots are pretty good. Shield Bro, can Shu wear them and run a lap?" Yushu was quite curious about the godly item Lin Yi got later. "Of course," Lin Yi said. "Why are you running?" "Lin Yi, don't spoil her. What if she breaks it?" Meng Yao didn't want Yushu to mess around. She glared at Yushu. "Plus, are you a practitioner? Do you know martial arts? This is a weapon for Sky-class practitioners. How are you going to use it?" At first, Lin Yi didn't think too much about it. But after Meng Yao's reminder, he suddenly realized that this was a weapon for Sky-class practitioners. How was he going to use it? His level wasn't high enough to activate it. Plus, he didn't have the incantation for a martial arts technique. He had the Gale Lightning boots, but he couldn't use it. With that thought, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little helpless. He forgot to ask the Grand Elder if there was a matching chant for it. Chapter 2768. This Elder Chin's son is a little helpless. Elder, our intel team did a thorough investigation on Lin Yi last time, but Lin Yi was only a mystic class at that time. Besides, this information has only been collected for about half a year, compared to our other assassination targets who started collecting information a year ago. This is already very recent information. Who knew that this kid could level up so quickly and kill Sky class masters in a second? Then they've been monitoring Lin E for so long, and they haven't heard anything about him. The Yellow Spring Elder also knew that what the Yongsan Elder said was the truth. Among their previous assassination targets, there had never been a freak like Lin E. I heard a little, but it was Lin Yi's follower, Fatty Lai, who spread the news. The intel team thought that he was just spouting nonsense to boost Lin Yi's reputation. The Yongsan Elder sighed and spread his hands. Even you, the Yellow Spring Elder, didn't believe it when you first heard that Lin E could kill Sky class masters in a second? That's true. The Yellow Spring Elder nodded and said in disbelief, "It seems that this Lin E is very strong. He can even kill Sky class masters in a second, and 3 Sky class masters at once. He's quite capable, isn't he? Indeed, if our people didn't die, it would be really unbelievable." The Yongsan Elder said, "It seems that when Lin E was at Mystic class, he killed 3 of our bronze plate elite assassins who were at the peak of Mystic class in a second. So if we want to find Lin E for revenge, I have to do it myself." The Yellow Spring Elder pondered and said, "Yellow Spring Elder, the Sky class meeting is getting closer and closer. Our Blood Cloak Underworld sect has been rejected by those ancient sects, and they don't want us to participate in that plan. If you personally kill people now, it'll give those ancient sects an excuse. It's not worth it." The Yongsan Elder quickly dissuaded. "Don't be impulsive. I'm just saying." Old Ancestor Yellow Spring nodded and said, "Hatred is nothing compared to that. How about this? You investigate Lin Yi's relatives and lovers, and we will attack Lin Yi's family. Since he can instantly kill a heaven ranker, let's avoid him for the time being and attack his family." "You're wise, Patriarch Yellow Spring." Patriarch Chunsun hastily ordered his subordinates to investigate. After Lin E left the Snow Valley, the highest elder fell ill. For a cultivator like her, it was rare for her to fall ill. But this time, she fell ill because of anger. She had been the highest elder of the Snow Valley for so many years, but this was the first time she felt so aggrieved. It was incomparably aggrieved, but she didn't have any blade skills, and Mrs. Tang couldn't kill or scold her. Putting aside her relationship with Tang Yun, she couldn't afford to offend her other daughter, Bing Tang. Bing Tang was in existence on the same level as her, and she couldn't have any other thoughts. And so, she fell ill, but the highest elder didn't dare tell others that she was sick. People would laugh at her, and she could only tell the people of the Snow Valley that she was going into isolation. Lin Yi's return this time was smooth. No one stopped him again, and he returned to the Donghai Villa. He parked the car in front of the villa. Meng Yao, Yushu, and Han Jingjing weren't back yet. Lin Yi thought that Wang Xingyan had gone to school, but when he opened the door to his room, he saw that Xingyan was sleeping on his bed. Xingyan had been getting more and more sleepy these days, and she didn't have much energy during the day and night. She rarely got jealous, so Meng Yao didn't let her go to school. She just slept at home and waited for Lin Yi to come back. Boss Bai also knew about Xingyan's situation, and there was no problem for her to apply for leave. As for Xingyan sleeping in Lin Yi's room, it was because she slept too much every day. Meng Yao and Yushu didn't have the same time difference as her, and they didn't want to disturb her rest, so they let her sleep alone in Lin Yi's room. "Xingyan, I'm back." Lin Yi felt sorry for Xingyan, who was getting more and more haggard by the day. If it wasn't for him, Xingyan wouldn't be like this. Ugh. Xingyan heard Lin Yi's voice and woke up in a daze. She had been sleeping for the past few days, and she wasn't as sleepy as before. She was still sleepy, but she would wake up when someone came back. She was surprised to see Lin Yi. "Lin Yi, Xingyan, I've got the herbs. I asked for 4 of them. I'll give one to you now." Lin Yi said as he went to his bag for the jade jasper grass. According to old Lin, the jade jasper grass had to be consumed directly, so Lin Yi gave it to Xinyan after washing it clean. Just eat it like this? Xinyan looked at the oddly shaped herb in Lin Yi's hand. Unsure of what to do. Yeah, just eat it like this. Close your eyes and eat it like a carrot, Lin Yi said with a smile. All right, thanks, Xinyan said, amused by Lin Yi's thought this was a treasure, not a carrot. Wouldn't she be eating it for nothing? What are you thanking me for? It's my fault that I'm sucking you like this. It's normal for me to get you some medicine. Lin Yi said. Oh, Xinyan blushed a little. What did he mean by sucking? Xinyan blushed a little at Lin Yi's choice of words, but she knew that she was overthinking things. She closed her eyes and started eating the carrot. Oh, no, the jade jasper grass. It had to be said that the jade jasper grass was an ancient herb. No wonder the snowy valley treated it like a treasure. The Grand Elder had treasured it a lot back in the trade. Xinyan felt much better after the herb was ingested, and she didn't yawn like she used to. She got off the bed on her own. You feeling better? Lin Yi was surprised and happy to see Xinyan up. I need to go to the bathroom, Xinyan said, blushing. She was supposed to go to the washroom when she woke up, but she forgot in the excitement of seeing Lin Yi come back. Now that she'd finished the elixir, she couldn't take it anymore and went to the washroom. Ugh, I thought you'd feel better already. Lin Yi sweated. I do feel a little better, Xinyan said as she rushed to the washroom. The bathroom was in Lin Yi's room, and the sound of running water made Lin Yi's imagination run wild. But Lin Yi had promised Xiaolong that nothing would happen between him and Xinyan. He wouldn't make things difficult for her. Chapter 2769. Is that so? Yushu wasn't interested in the boots at all. After dinner, Han Jingjing went back to her house while Meng Yao, Yushu, and Xinyan went upstairs to sleep. Lin Yi didn't ask Xinyan to stay, afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop himself from practicing in the middle of the night. Xinyan, on the other hand, was too embarrassed to stay. She used to help Lin Yi with his practicing. So what excuse could she use now? Lin Yi went back to his room and gave Boss Bai a call, telling him that he was safe. Master Bai, how's the inheritance in my body? Any news? I'm looking into it for you, but there's no news yet. Man, it'd be great if I was still in Five Elements sect, but I can't ask them now. Boss Bai said helplessly. It's okay. There's no rush. Lin Yi said, but he was actually quite worried. How about this? I'll call my second disciple and ask him. Boss Bai naturally understood what Lin Yi was thinking. He hesitated for a bit before making his decision. His relationship with Xian Chen wasn't good, but his relationship with Xian Jin was very good. Boss Bai's alchemist had passed away a long time ago, and he barely taught him anything. Xian Jun's alchemy skills were taught by Boss Bai himself, so they'd always been close. They hadn't been in contact for years, and he didn't know if Xian Jun was still the Xian Jin from before, or if he'd switched to Xian Chen's side. There won't be any side effects, will there? Lin Yi asked worriedly. I'll try. If it works, then it works. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter. Boss Bai said with a laugh. At most, I'll lose face. What's the big deal? Thank you, Master Bai. Lin Yi sighed. The former head of Five Elements sect was asking his former disciple, and he might even lose face. It was all for him, so why wouldn't Lin Yi move? If you can grow up, it will be my greatest joy. I still hope that one day we can return to the Five Elements sect together. Boss Bai said. Lin Yi didn't say anything more. Words of gratitude were superfluous. Everything depended on his future actions. Boss Bai hung up Lin Yi's call and hesitated for a long time before he finally called Xian Jun. In the Five Elements sect, Xian Chen and Xian Jun's satellite phone numbers hadn't changed for many years. He always had them, but he never took the initiative to call them. He would rather forget about them. But today, for the sake of Lin Yi, for the sake of his disciple, he had to call Patriarch Xianzhen. Ancestor Xianzhen was currently studying the pill formula that Kong Mingming had brought back. It was a 4th-ranked pill formula. This time, the pill formula was flawless, but he was unable to concoct it. He couldn't help but sigh. If eldest brother Xianzhen was here, he would definitely be able to concoct this pill, right? Eldest brother, how are you doing? Patriarch Xianzhen only dared to reveal his true feelings when there was no one around. All these years, under the pressure of Patriarch Xianzhen, he could only swallow his anger. For the sake of the sect, he could only cooperate with Xianzhen. A phone rang. Patriarch Xianzhen thought that it was Patriarch Xianzhen calling to ask him to return to the sect. After all, Patriarch Xianzhen had been staying in the Heavenly Elixir sect all this time. However, when Patriarch Xianzhen looked at the caller ID on the phone, he was slightly stunned. It was actually a strange phone number. Hello? How are you? Patriarch Xianzhen picked up the phone. Because the satellite phone number was special, the possibility of calling the wrong number was relatively small. Therefore, although he didn't know who it was, Patriarch Xianzhen still picked up the phone. Xianzhen, is that you? Boss Bai heard Patriarch Xianzhen's voice again and was filled with emotions. It was as if he had returned to the time when he was young, when he would concoct pills with him every day. That time was always so happy. You are eldest brother? Patriarch Xianzhen's eyes widened. The moment he heard this voice, tears filled his eyes. He didn't expect that the person he was talking about just now would actually call him. Yes, it's me. Xianzhen, are you all right? Boss Bai asked. Eldest brother, I'm sorry. Patriarch Xianzhen had a lot of words to say, but in the end, they turned into apologies because he didn't know how to express his current complicated feelings. It's all in the past. I don't blame you. Boss Bai laughed. He had already thought through what happened back then. It shouldn't have anything to do with Xianzhen. He was just used. The person who did this should be Xianzhen. No, it's my fault. I'm too cowardly. After so many years, I didn't dare to find you and bring you back to the sect. Sob, sob, sob. Patriarch Xianzhen cried out loud like a child. However, he didn't care. In the secret chamber of the Heavenly Elixir sect, no one would know. Boss Bai also understood at this moment that Xianzhen didn't walk the same path as Xianzhen. His personality was still as cowardly as before. Although he had become the patriarch of a sect, he was still a child in his heart. Xianzhen, don't cry. I know what happened back then had nothing to do with you. Boss Bai comforted him. Yes. Hearing that Boss Bai said that to him, Xianzhen relaxed a lot. I came to find you this time because I have something to ask of you. Boss Bai was a little relieved. It seemed that his second junior brother could be trusted. The inheritance of Lin Yi should be settled. Eldest senior brother, please don't say that. If there's anything you want me to do, just say it. What do you want me to do? Just say it, Patriarch Xianzhen hurriedly said. But you also know that there are some things that I can't do with Xianzhen around. Are you asking me not to target your disciple in the 5 Elements sect? That's not it. Boss Bai denied. I won't make it difficult for you. It's something else. That's good. Patriarch Xianzhen let out a sigh of relief. He didn't dare to go against Patriarch Xianzhen. That's good. Patriarch Xianzhen let out a sigh of relief. He didn't dare to go against Patriarch Xianzhen. It could be said that the 5 Elements sect was completely under Patriarch Xianzhen's control. He, the second patriarch, was actually just an empty shell. His force was only the Heavenly Elixir sect, but it was only a secret force. On the surface, the Heavenly Elixir sect was still under Patriarch Xianzhen's control. He couldn't do too much, or else Patriarch Xianchen would see his flaws. He would be fine, but his two disciples would definitely be out of luck. It's like this. How can an ethereal attribute accept the inheritance of source energy and turn it into a real attribute? Boss Bai asked. This is recorded in detail in the scripture pavilion of our 5 Elements sect, chapter 2780. Inheritance method, eldest brother. You don't need to investigate this. I know. Although Patriarch Xianzhen was curious why Boss Bai asked about this, he didn't ask. Instead, he agreed without hesitation. I'll tell you now. Oh, you remember now? That's great. I'll record it down. Boss Bai was a little excited. He didn't think that the thing he had been worrying about for so many days would come so easily. Patriarch Xianzhen was still as respectful as before and would do his best to fulfill his requests. This made Boss Bai very happy. However, if he wasn't forced to this point, Boss Bai wouldn't have called to ask for help. This was a blessing in disguise. Okay, eldest brother, what you're talking about is the inheritance of source energy that can turn an ethereal attribute into a real attribute, right? It's not the kind of inheritance that ordinary inheritors have. Patriarch Xianzhen asked. That's right. It's this kind of inheritance. Boss Bai nodded and said, the inheritors don't have to go through so much trouble to understand the inheritance. They just have to go to the place of origin to understand it. I don't have to go through so much trouble to call you. There are 2 ways to inherit source energy. One is the right way. It requires a series of complicated preparations. Then, after taking the bone and marrow washing pill, go to the place of inheritance to inherit source energy. This preparation is a very complicated process. If you want to know, I'll write it down as soon as possible and find a chance to mail it to you. Patriarch Xianzhen said. Okay, be careful. Boss Bai said gratefully. It was very dangerous for Patriarch Xianzhen to do this. Although he could enter the scripture pavilion of the 5 Elements sect at will and read the books inside, it would be very difficult for him to send a copy of the inheritance of source energy to Boss Bai without anyone knowing. From what Patriarch Xianzhen said, the situation in the 5 Elements sect was basically under Patriarch Xianzhen's control. His eyes were everywhere. If Patriarch Xianzhen wanted to do this without anyone knowing, he would have to put in a lot of effort. For example, memorizing a paragraph every day and then copying it after going back. Otherwise, if he took the book away directly, Patriarch Xianzhen would definitely be suspicious. Patriarch Xianzhen was focused on alchemy. Why would he suddenly be interested in inheritance? There must be something wrong. Boss Bai was very clear about this. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Patriarch Xianzhen had been used to living under surveillance. If it wasn't for surveillance, he wouldn't have been able to cultivate his own force in the Heavenly Elixir sect. Right. What's the other way of inheritance? Boss Bai continued to ask. The other way of inheritance is evil. However, it's also a shortcut. Patriarch Xianzhen said that is to let the ethereal attribute person and the inheritor of this type do dual cultivation. Through dual cultivation, they obtain the inheritance of source energy. The disadvantage of this method is that the inheritor must be a virgin. Otherwise, there will be no effect. Oh, you can use this method to carry out the inheritance of source energy? Boss Bai was a little surprised. Is this method accurate? It should be accurate. That's what was recorded in the ancient books of the sect. The reason why I remember it is because Xianzhen used to study things like this. Xianzhen is responsible for the inheritors. Patriarch Xianzhen said, however, although this method is simple, it's not very realistic. First of all, the known inheritors are currently prioritized for that plan. Therefore, it's very difficult for you to find other inheritors. Eldest senior brother, on your side, who are you asking about this for? Oh, it's a friend of mine. I'm just casually asking. It wasn't that Boss Bai didn't trust Patriarch Xianzhen. He just didn't want to expose too much about Lin Yi. It seems that only the first method is more realistic. That should be it. Patriarch Xianzhen nodded. Eldest senior brother, don't worry. Just wait patiently. Leave the rest to me. All right, then we'll contact each other. Once you're done, just give me a call. Boss Bai said. After hanging up, Boss Bai called Lin Yi right away and told Lin Yi what Patriarch Xianzhen said. Lin Yi was a little taken aback after hearing this. Dual cultivation with an inheritor? What does he mean by dual cultivation? Lin Yi had to admit that his thoughts were a little evil. There were many types of dual training, Yanghua, and Xiaolong News was a dual training, but most of the dual trainings in novels referred to them doing it in bed. I didn't ask about that. Since the inheritor has to be a virgin, then dual cultivation should be. You know what I mean? Boss Bai said, Ugh, okay. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. His concubine was probably the inheritor, and dual cultivating with Xiao Xiao would fill up one of his ethereal attributes, right? Make it a real attribute, but the Ice Palace's requirement for Xiao Xiao was to maintain her virginity, and that conflicted with dual cultivation. So Lin Yi didn't know what to do. But dual cultivation with 7 inheritors, that's a little unrealistic, isn't it? It's unrealistic, so I'm leaning towards the first method. But I'll have to wait for my junior brother Xuanzhen to copy it back. Boss Bai said, he's under Xuanzhen's control right now, and he can't touch the core secrets of the 5 Elements sect. Xianchen is also doing inheritors, but Xuanzhen doesn't know much about these things, and I don't either. Then what should we do if we dual cultivate? Lin Yi asked. I didn't ask about that, but I'll go ask if you're interested. Boss Bai said, all right, there's no harm in knowing more. Lin Yi nodded. After hanging up, Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Boss Bai's news was good, but there was nothing. Dual cultivation with an inheritor wasn't realistic for Lin Yi. Even if Xiao Xiao was an inheritor, how long would it take to gather the other 6 inheritors? Even if they did, would they dual cultivate with him? Xiao Xiao would be fine, but what about the others? Lin Yi didn't want to do anything that would force others to do. Plus, even if Lin Yi wanted to force them, would they be that easy to do so? The inheritors all had ancient powers behind them, and Lin Yi couldn't force them. Shaking his head, Lin Yi didn't think about that for now. He placed his hopes on the first inheritance method the Xuanzhen ancestor mentioned. Chapter 2770. Every day, an everyday sect. Pin Liang was very depressed. It had been more than a month since he returned to the everyday, an everyday sect. Other than the first time when Pure Yang's Sky Lord met him and arranged for him to stay at the back of the mountain, he had never seen him again. Every day, apart from seeing Gao Xiaofu, he couldn't even see a shadow of a ghost. At first, he thought that Heavenly Venerate Pure Yang had given him special treatment and arranged for him to live in a paradise. However, as time passed, he realized that this back mountain was simply the burial ground of the everyday and everyday sex patriarchs. It wasn't a place for cultivation at all. Only the most ordinary disciples would be allocated a house in the back mountain, and his house was the most remote. Not far from it was the cemetery. Fortunately, Naipeo didn't forget about his boss, Pin Liang, and came to visit him often. This comforted Pin Liang a little, but it didn't feel good to be ignored like this. Naipeo didn't say much, but Pin Liang could tell that he'd been trying his best, but the master of Pure Yang didn't respond. And so Pin Liang couldn't leave, and there was no point in staying here. He couldn't practice Naipeo's practitioner's arts either. So all he could do was train with Xiaofu in the most basic of arts. Time passed by like a year. One evening, Pin Liang was bored out of his mind. He said to Xiaofu, Xiaofu, I heard that there's a graveyard over there. Why don't we go explore tonight? Pin Liang was a coward, but he liked the thrill of horror. He used to watch horror movies alone at home. It was a perverted mentality that made him want to welcome the horror. Explore? Xiaofu was bored out of his mind as well. Exploring a graveyard was a little scary, but the everyday, and every day sect really didn't have any entertainment. They didn't even have a TV or a computer, and their phones didn't have any signal. They had to borrow a satellite phone to communicate with the outside world, and the sect didn't allow private phones. And so Xiaofu was bored out of his mind. He thought about it and agreed. Sure, let's go now. Let's go. Your Liang bro is really bored to death. I need a good thrill today. Pin Liang cursed. There's no women here, so we can only play horror. As the two of them spoke, they took the flashlight and walked out of the courtyard, heading towards the direction of the cemetery. Although the graveyard here wasn't as scary as those unmarked tombs with bones everywhere, it was still very scary to see tombstones everywhere. Especially since it was relatively empty here. When the wind blew, it would make a woo-woo sound just like a ghost's cry. Brother Liang, isn't this a little too remote? Nothing can happen to us, right? Gao Xiaofu was a little scared. The sound of the wind made him shiver uncontrollably. What could possibly happen? We've been living here every day, and nothing has happened. Plus, this is the burial ground of the everyday and everyday sex ancestors. They're our ancestors. Even if something happened, it'd be a good thing, Pin Liang said with a wave of his hand. Plus, how would it be exciting if it wasn't scary? Then why are we still exploring? That's true. Gao Xiaofu forced himself to nod, but he was still a little scared. Liang bro, why don't I walk in front? You're brave enough to stay behind? Gao Xiaofu kept feeling like there was someone behind him, but when he turned around, there was nothing. He was really afraid that a ghost with a pale face would suddenly appear and bite him. All right, coward. You walk in front. I'll watch for you. Pin Liang nodded and let Xiaofu walk in front. Pin Liang was scared, but this was the feeling he wanted. The more scared he was, the better it felt. There was an inexplicable sense of satisfaction in his heart. And so, the two of them walked towards the graveyard. Although the tombstones here were neat and orderly, the whole graveyard was built on the back of the mountain, and the mountain paths were of different depths. The two of them couldn't walk very fast. Liang bro, are you still there? Xiaofu's voice was shaky. He would ask every once in a while to see if Pin Liang was still behind him. I'm here, Pin Liang said. Ha, that's good. Gao Xiaofu let out a breath of relief. He wasn't that scared now that there was someone behind him. Look, Liang bro, this grave looks like it was built not long ago, and it's even bigger than the other tombstones. It looks like it's an ancestor-level figure. I wonder which ancestor has passed away in recent years. There was no sound from behind Gao Xiaofu. Liang bro. Gao Xiaofu paused. Pin Liang didn't answer for a long time, and he panicked. He called out again with a shaky voice. Liang bro, are you there? There was still no answer. Gao Xiaofu broke out in a cold sweat, and his clothes were all wet. He panted heavily, his entire body numb. He wanted to turn around, but he couldn't muster up the courage. Liang bro, I'm begging you, don't scare me. I'm scared. Gao Xiaofu almost cried. He thought that Pin Liang was just pretending to be quiet to scare him. Of course, that was the best plan he could think of. He knew that Pin Liang shouldn't be trying to scare him. However, Xiaofu only got silence in response. There was no movement behind him. Gao Xiaofu took a deep breath and turned around. He wanted to see what was going on, but the moment he turned around, Pin Liang was gone. The graveyard was huge, and the surroundings were blurry under the moonlight. But there was no one there. Pin Liang had disappeared into thin air. Fuck. Liang bro, where did you go? Gao Xiaofu fell to the ground in shock. Pin Liang felt like he'd stepped on soft ground, and his whole body felt like he'd sunk in a quicksand. He fell down, landing heavily on the hard ground, and lost consciousness. However, Pin Liang woke up again after a short period of unconsciousness. His mind was a mess, and he had the strange feeling that he had turned into another person, but he was still Pin Liang. He opened his eyes in a daze and was shocked to find himself standing in a hole, and in the hole was a pile of bones. But Pin Liang didn't feel any fear in front of the bones. Instead, he felt a sense of familiarity, as if the bones were him. Chapter 2771. Rubbing his feet that hurt from the fall, he was about to stand up. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his head, as if his soul had been pulled out, causing him to roll on the ground in pain. Ah, ah, ah. Pin Liang let out a blood-curdling screech. He felt as if his soul had returned, but it wasn't the same as before. In an instant, memories that didn't belong to him surged into his brain, giving him a splitting headache. Xiaofu didn't know what to do when he heard Pin Liang's heart-wrenching scream. Xiaofu was so scared that he peed his pants. "Liang bro, is that you? What happened to you? Were you taken away by the evil spirits?" Pin Liang heard Xiaofu scream, but he didn't have the time to respond. He rolled on the ground, struggling. Finally, the headache subsided, and the strange memories seemed to have fused with his brain. Pin Liang sat up from the ground, his eyes filled with confusion and surprise. He suddenly let out a strange cry. "Ha ha ha! I, the mad dragon ancestor, am finally back. Wahaha!" But after laughing, he scratched his head. He realized that he was both the mad dragon ancestor and Pin Liang. This was not a successful possession. The mad dragon ancestor was the most powerful ancestor of the everyday and everyday sect in recent years. When he was alive, he had the strength of a peak late-stage heaven class, only one step away from the heavenly Tao. But a dozen years ago, two ruthless people came to the everyday and everyday sect to wreak havoc, sending the mad dragon ancestor to heaven with one punch. Fortunately, the violent dragon ancestor had cultivated a secret technique. After his death, his primordial spirit was preserved in his tomb, waiting for the opportunity to take over his body. But all these years, no one had ever stepped into his tomb, so he had no chance to take over his body. After all, after the tomb was built, it would be sealed, and it would be very difficult to open it again. Back then, Mad Dragon Patriarch's body was personally escorted into the tomb by Mad Bull Patriarch, and it was impossible for Mad Dragon Patriarch to take over Mad Bull Patriarch's body. Not to mention the fact that Mad Bull Patriarch's strength was not easy to take over. Just the friendship between him and his junior brother prevented him from doing such a thing. The everyday and everyday sect wasn't a righteous sect, but they were a very loyal sect. This could be seen from how Heibao Bro, the pure Yang Sky Lord's disciple, was able to get Naipeo to join the sect with just one recommendation letter, becoming the pure Yang Sky Lord's disciple. And these were much stronger than the Five Elements sect. However, even so, because of the appearance of the two ruthless people who caused a scene in the past, the everyday and everyday sect was unable to catch up to the Five Elements sect strength. Otherwise, with Mad Dragon Patriarch and Mad Leopard Patriarch, two Sky Class Late Phase Peak Perfection Masters, why would the everyday and everyday sect have to submit to the Five Elements sect? Pin Liang had come here by pure coincidence. After all these years, the soil above the tomb had loosened a little, and Pin Liang's foot landed on it, causing it to sink in, allowing the Mad Dragon Patriarch to take over his body. But although the wild dragon ancestor was at the peak of the late stage of the heaven realm, his spirit was a lot weaker. Moreover, so much time had passed that the wild dragon ancestor's spirit was getting weaker and weaker. If he hadn't completed the possession, then it wouldn't be long before he dissipated. The side effect of this possession was that the Mad Dragon Patriarch couldn't completely replace Zhong Pingliang and could only merge his soul and Zhong Pingliang's soul into one, becoming a new person. This person could be said to be both Zhong Pingliang and the Mad Dragon Patriarch. He had both their memories and personalities, but it was also an independent existence. The two merged into one, and although Zhong Pingliang felt like he had aged a lot, he was still very happy, especially since he still retained his memories and half of his personality, so he still had the temperament of a young man. Wasn't he too amazing? He suddenly became the everyday an everyday sex patriarch, and the first patriarch at that. Wah, I, Zhong Pingliang, have finally made a comeback. Whatever Lin E, that's all floating clouds. In a novel, I, Zhong Pingliang, am the main character. A beautiful life is about to begin. Zhong Pingliang was very pleased with his future when he suddenly heard Gao Xiaofu's voice. Liang bro, where are you? Gao Xiaofu's voice sounded like he was about to cry. He wanted to run now, but he didn't dare to. This place was too scary. Only then did Zhong Pingliang remember that he was here to explore with Gao Xiaofu. And so, Zhong Pingliang quickly crawled out of the cave. Gao Xiaofu had just shouted when he saw a person pop out of the ground not far in front of him. He almost fainted from the shock. How could a person pop out of the ground? Was it a ghost? A ghost! Gao Xiaofu cried out. Xiaofu, don't panic. I'm your Liang bro. Zhong Pingliang waved his hand and said faintly, Ah, Liang bro, you're finally back? Gao Xiaofu heard Zhong Pingliang's voice and took a closer look. It really was Liang bro. He quickly climbed up from the ground and ran towards Zhong Pingliang happily. I'm back. You're Liang bro's follower. How can you panic like this? It's so embarrassing. Zhong Pingliang looked at Gao Xiaofu and shook his head helplessly. Liang bro, what's wrong? Why do you sound so weird? Why do you sound so old? Gao Xiaofu asked curiously. Zhong Pingliang's temperament seemed to have changed as well. Although Zhong Pingliang didn't say anything during the exploration, Gao Xiaofu could tell that he was nervous. But now, Zhong Pingliang was terrifyingly calm. Ha ha, it's nothing. Something happened, that's all. Go get Naipeo here, I'll call him if I need anything. Zhong Pingliang planned on planning his future. He'd just completed the possession, so he had to do some planning. Ah, now? Gao Xiaofu paused. It's the middle of the night, can I go get Naipeo? What's wrong with that? Tell him it's me, Liang bro, and he has to come whether he wants to or not. Zhong Pingliang naturally had a domineering aura around him. He used to be Naipeo's boss, but Naipeo was a famous person in the everyday sect, the disciple of pure Yang Sky sovereign. So, Zhong Pingliang didn't dare act like a boss, afraid that Naipeo would alienate him. Chapter 2772. And so, Pin Liang regained his confidence as a boss. He couldn't help but feel emotional, wanting to sing out loud. I haven't been a boss for so many years. Yes. Xiaofu nodded after seeing Pin Liang's insistence. He wanted to leave this graveyard as soon as possible. Pin Liang had disappeared and reappeared, but he didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary. The two quickly returned to their house, and Xiaofu went to call Naipeo. Pin Liang, on the other hand, sat on his bed, quietly thinking about his life. He'd accepted the fact that he was half-possessed, and as far as he was concerned, it was a good thing. Not only was his consciousness still there, but he also had a strong soul memory in his body. He wasn't far from being strong. Thinking back to the shallow arts he'd practiced before, Pin Liang was a little pissed off. Pure Yang Sky Master. That bastard. How dare he give him something like that? Luckily, he wasn't a golden class practitioner yet, or else it'd take a lot of effort for him to switch to something else. Man, Pin Liang looked at his body with the eyes of the mad dragon ancestor, and couldn't help but shake his head. His body was just too weak as it could be. He was missing a kidney. However, the loss of a kidney didn't have much of an impact on the mantra that the mad dragon patriarch had cultivated in his lifetime. It was just that his body was a little too weak, and he had already missed the best time to cultivate. He could only rely on some heavenly treasures to change and strengthen his physique. Naipeo was loyal to Pin Liang, and although it was the middle of the night, he rushed to Pin Liang's house as soon as Xiaofu called him. Liang bro, you're looking for me? Naipeo asked. Oh, Naipeo, you're here? Pin Liang nodded, gratified. This follower of his was quite loyal. Yeah, Liang bro, is there something urgent in the middle of the night? Naipeo asked curiously. Take me to that pure young bastard. Pin Liang said as he stood up. What? Naipeo paused, his face paling as he quickly covered Pin Liang's mouth, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Liang bro, what are you saying? You can't say something like that. How could you say Master's name like that? Then let me ask you, Pao, I had a conflict with your master. Are you on my side, or are you on your master's side? Pin Liang purposely put on a cold face as he asked with his hands behind his back. Liang bro, my life is yours. Without you, I wouldn't be here today. Of course I'm on your side. Naipeo said quickly. All right, if that's the case, then bring me to Chunyang. Pin Liang said with a wave of his hand. All right. Naipeo had no choice but to nod, wondering what the hell was wrong with Liang bro. Going to Shifu? Moreover, from his tone, he seemed to be very dissatisfied with his master. What would they do if they really had a conflict? Even if he made a move, he wouldn't be a match for master. Could it be that Liang bro was angry at his master for leaving him at the back mountain for so long? But Naipeo was helping him out. Liang bro was a patient man. After all, he could even put up with Lin Yi after all this time. Couldn't he put up with his master too? Pao, don't worry. Your Liang bro has his reasons. Pin Liang said with a strong voice. Yes. Naipeo said helplessly as he brought Pin Liang to pure Yang Sky Master's courtyard. Since Naipeo was pure Yang Sky Master's prized disciple, the patrolling disciples didn't stop him. Pin Liang and Xiaofu followed him here, and so naturally no one stopped them. All right, Pao, knock on the door. Pin Liang said calmly as he glanced at the gate. Pin Liang could find this place, but without Naipeo leading the way, he'd be stopped by the patrolling disciples of the everyday, an everyday sect, and that'd be troublesome to explain. Now, Liang bro, Master is resting right now. Look, if you have any grievances, just tell me. I'll pass it on, okay? Naipeo really didn't want Pin Liang and Pure Yang to fight, because the two weren't on the same level at all. Let's do it. Pin Liang shook his head and insisted. Seeing how insistent Pin Liang was, Naipeo had no other choice but to knock on the door. Pure Yang was just about to rest when he heard the knocking. He paused, a little impatient. It's so late. Who's knocking? What's wrong? Master, it's me, Naipeo said carefully. Naipeo, what's the matter? Pure Yang heard Naipeo's voice, not as angry as before. He asked faintly, why are you looking for me so late? Master, it's... Naipeo was about to explain when Pin Liang cut him off. Chunyang, you traitorous little bastard. Come out and see me now. Zhong Pin Liang roared. Naipeo almost fainted when he heard that, thinking that it was over. It was really over. He didn't know what was wrong with Liang bro today, daring to go against the Pure Yang master. Pure Yang suddenly heard Pin Liang's voice and raged, jumping out of the yard. He wanted to kill Pin Liang right away, but then he remembered that Pin Liang was Naipeo's boss. If he killed Pin Liang, Naipeo wouldn't feel good about it, so he could only hold back his anger. Pin Liang, you've drunk too much, haven't you? How dare you act like this in front of me? Do you want to die? Naipeo, you brought him here in the middle of the night just because you're drunk? Pure Yang couldn't be blamed for thinking like that. No matter how much of a bastard Pin Liang was, he wouldn't come here to yell at him, wouldn't he? And so, Pure Yang thought that Pin Liang had drunk too much. Pure Yang, you're the one who's drunk. Why aren't you greeting your master? Pin Liang snorted coldly. You're the sect master now, aren't you? Are you looking down on me? Your master? Master? Pure Yang Empyrean was stunned as he looked at Zhong Pin Liang in shock. He was even more annoyed. He couldn't help but say, my master, Master Mad Dragon, died a long time ago. Is there something wrong with your head? Naipeo, what the hell is going on? If you don't give me a proper explanation, I don't care if Pin Liang is your big bro or not. He'll pay. Liang bro. Nai Peo didn't know what to do. Chapter 2773. Give you a reasonable explanation? Well, when you were about to be executed by the sect for stealing a heavenly treasure, did you forget who was the one who protected you, who took you in as a disciple and taught you the martial Tao? Master Chunyang's expression changed. Not many people in the sect knew about his past, and even if they knew, they wouldn't dare to speak about it. How did Zhong Pingliang know about it? He used to be an outer disciple of the everyday sect and wasn't valued. In order to cultivate, he was in charge of transporting a treasure and secretly took one, and it was exposed. In fact, there was an extra treasure, and it was because of this that he dared to take it. However, the inner disciple in charge of the treasury also took one, and he was dragged into it. Because the inner disciple was the disciple of an elder of the everyday sect, he was protected, and the responsibility was pushed to him, and they were ready to execute him. In the end, at this critical moment, the mad dragon patriarch realized that he had a good aptitude and took him in as a disciple, and he escaped. Of course, that inner disciple had been killed after he became the sect master, and those who knew about it back then wouldn't mention it again, so he found it strange when Zhong Pingliang said it. How do you know? Master Chunyang looked at Zhong Pingliang warily and shouted, Humph! I still know a lot more, you little bastard. When you broke through from the golden class to the mystic class, who protected you personally? When you broke through to the earth class, who gave you the small chi gathering pill? When your old mother was sick, who gave you the pill to go back and visit her? Zhong Pingliang said angrily, You little bastard, don't you even recognize me? You are? Master Chunyang looked at Zhong Pingliang in front of him in disbelief. If the first two things were known by others, it would be understandable, but the latter thing about his mother's illness, only his master, the Mad Dragon Patriarch, knew about it, and the Mad Dragon Patriarch was already dead. You little bastard, didn't I tell you before that I've cultivated a secret technique to preserve my soul? Kwangyo doesn't know, and you can't remember? You actually built a sealed tomb for me. How do you expect me to be reborn? Zhong Pingliang said angrily, If it wasn't for me, the previous Zhong Pingliang passing by and accidentally collapsing the ground above the tomb, my soul would have dissipated. You are really my master? Heavenly Lord Pure Yang's eyes widened as he suddenly recalled that his master, Master Mad Dragon, had indeed said that he had cultivated a secret technique that could preserve one's essence spirit after death. However, he had been young and his cultivation was shallow back then, so he hadn't thought much of it and had forgotten about it. It was only when Zhong Pingliang mentioned it that he recalled it. However, this only served to further prove one thing. The Zhong Pingliang in front of him wasn't Zhong Pingliang anymore. The Zhong Pingliang who had been possessed was his master, Mad Dragon Patriarch. Humph, do you want me to tell you that the key to the treasure vault is in the mechanical box at the head of my bed? Pin Liang snorted when he saw that Lin Yi didn't quite believe him and spilled out a huge secret. Empyrean Pure Yang no longer had any doubts. This was because the location of the treasury key was a secret of the an everyday sect. Only the sect master knew of it. Patriarch Wild Dragon was the former sect master, Patriarch Wild Bull was the temporary sect master, and Empyrean Pure Yang was the current sect master. Even the elders didn't know the location of the key, and now that Pin Liang had said it, there was no doubt about his identity. Originally, after the death of the Wild Dragon ancestor, the Wild Bull ancestor, he should have moved into the Wild Dragon ancestor's residence because all the previous sect leaders lived there. But because the Wild Bull ancestor wanted to reach the peak of the late heaven realm, he temporarily became the sect leader and passed his position to the Wild Dragon ancestor's disciple, Pure Yang Empyrean. As for Empyrean Pure Yang, He respected his master in his heart, so he had never lived in his master's room. He still lived in his former courtyard. It was just that after he became the sect leader, he had rebuilt it and made it even more luxurious. With that thought, Emperor Pure Yang knelt down in front of Pinliang. Master, you're finally back. Your unworthy disciple Pure Yang greets you. Master! Get up, you little brat. You're not to blame for not knowing. Pinliang raised his hand. Yes, Emperor Pure Yang was overjoyed. As well, he didn't think that his master would be able to reincarnate. This was great news. With this, the everyday sect strength would increase by leaps and bounds. However, he suddenly thought of Zhang Naipeo and Gao Xiaofu beside him. A look of pity flashed in his eyes as he turned to Pinliang. Master, the location of the treasury key is a secret of the sect. What do you think about these two? Emperor Pure Yang didn't want to part with Naipeo, but he had to ask for Pinliang's opinion. According to him, he wanted to kill Gao Xiaofu and keep Naipeo. Liang bro, why you're not Liang bro anymore? Gao Xiaofu was scared, out of his wits. He understood what Emperor Pure Yang was trying to get rid of him. How could he not be scared? Naipeo looked at Pinliang in shock as well, his eyes complicated. Liang bro, you too, don't worry, I'm still your Liang bro. We brothers still have to work hard to get revenge on that little bastard Lin. Plus, you guys still have to help me get Meng Yao. Pinliang said with a wave of his hand. You're still Liang bro? Naipeo and Xiaofu looked at each other, confused. Who was this person in front of them? Emperor Pure Yang found it strange. As well, could it be that the soul possession had failed? Had this person become Zhong Pinliang again? However, at this moment, Zhong Pinliang said to Pure Yang Emperor, although I am your master, my primordial spirit is not strong enough to complete the possession. I can only fuse with Zhong Pinliang's soul. So after the fusion, I will be Zhong Pinliang and the Mad Dragon Patriarch. I see. So you're still my master then? Emperor Pure Yang breathed in relief. He was still his master after the fusion. Pao and Xiaofu are my trusted subordinates. Don't worry. They're both loyal to me. Pinliang said. Yes, master. Emperor Pure Yang said quickly. Then isn't the seniority a bit messed up now? Me and Naipeo. Do we have to call him Master Uncle from now on? That you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.